ad.net. We're the marketplace outside of Google and Bing. And as I said, I'm clearly not a woman, but I have two daughters that I want to empower to, be more successful than I am. And I have a wife who's a lot more successful than I am. So, any man should want to have their women stronger, more powerful than them, and do everything they can to empower that ethos. So let's do quick introductions, and we're actually gonna have a lot of content to go through today. So I mentioned I'm Todd Eulis, SVP of ad.net. We're the marketplace outside of Google and Bing for brands to extend their campaigns and get more customers. So Rashi, you want to kind of jump into your background, your roles, and we can kind of go through a lot of the content you kind of put together.
Yeah, definitely. It's so nice to be here, and thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. As was sort of mentioned, I have been in the business for a long time. I've worked at a variety of different tech companies. Currently, I'm at Next Insurance as the executive brand director. What I do at Next Insurance is I lead a combination of product marketing, content marketing, social, brand, as well as research and insights. And I think that what some of the most important things that we do at Next is so we are in an insurance business. We're actually focusing specifically on small business owners who haven't been served in the insurance industry in the past. And so we have like a really special niche that falls within that category and within that audience. Prior to being at Next Insurance, I was on the Google consumer apps team, where I was doing a lot of the creative strategy work for Google apps. So that includes Google Search, Google Photos, Google Maps, as well as a variety of other Google Lens. And then prior to that, I was at Pinterest. And I started at Pinterest really early stage. It was actually, I think, about 17 people when I started in the New York office, and about 300 people when I was in the whole corporate. So a lot of different experience, but I'm really excited to be here to talk specifically about being a woman in marketing, and also really thinking about how, as women, we can share perspectives to help drive innovation and continue to challenge the status quo within the marketing space.
Yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about, maybe kind of jumping right in. You obviously went from big brands to Next. Talk about kind of going from a newer brand, kind of coming from Google and then Pinterest. Your background and kind of your decision tree, and then we can kind of get to some of the things you want to obviously advocate and push. For obviously women to kind of help support the group.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's so interesting. When I first joined Google, I really joined in because of the incredible team and a lot of the innovation that was going on. But what I started to realize when I was there is that Google has actually become almost like what we would define as a heritage brand. And there are there's a lot of attention to detail that goes involved in Google marketing. And so being really disciplined about how you can make sure to own your particular brand, but then also help drive it forward, help come up with new and interesting and innovative ways that people may perceive you, was a big part of the role. And that's very different than at Next. So at Next, we're actually building up that equity. And so there is less history, less of that heritage angle that we need to focus on. But equally important is a real focus on paying attention to the details. So how do we, as a new brand, make sure that people understand that with consistency of logo, consistency of colors, that we are this one brand that is specifically helping small businesses and entrepreneurs. We're helping them thrive. What can we do to build look and feel, to build creative work that helps consumers understand that everything that we're doing is not only bringing a new perspective to the insurance industry, but it's also helping people understand that we are on the side of the little guy, and that we are working both in our external advertising and marketing, but also within our company to make things better and to make things more delightful for our end consumer, which ends up being that small business owner. So I think that it was a real shift. Also, working within a really large organization, then to moving into a place where you just have to be a little bit scrappier has been a really interesting change for me. But one of the things that I've really appreciated being at Next is that as we develop creative campaigns, as we develop marketing, the intention and the focus for our end consumer has always been there. And so what we're doing as we're building that brand equity, it becomes a lot easier because we have that really tight focus on the end audience. And so we can tell more of a consistent story, whether it's across our TV channels, across our radio, or we launched our social channels in the beginning of Q4 of last year, being really tight about making sure that we're focusing on the right businesses, the right stories, and we're really doing a nice job with making sure that our consumer is the end focus.
No, and I'm sure they appreciate that, kind of coming versus, the big company, and kind of disrupting that ecosystem. I'm sure they appreciate that, for what you guys are doing. So, I mean, obviously, you've had pivots in your career, kind of going from big company, big process to kind of smaller challenger brands. And I think kind of tying it back to obviously, you being a woman, you being an executive leader in the marketing world. I mean, what were some challenges that you faced, kind of coming in as a woman, and ultimately what, I think obviously, and anybody has questions, please type them in. I think I want to use this as a way to leverage some of your expertise, give some of your advice to kind of support women in the community. And I'm videoing this. I'm going to show my 2 daughters afterwards too. My wife will probably roll her eyes. She works at an insurance company as well. So, like what would some of the challenges you face and some of the advice you would give, on how to overcome those challenges, kind of being a woman and being an executive leader in marketing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's really interesting that you asked that. So one thing I'll be really transparent about right now is I'm actually currently on maternity leave. So I am I'm actually a new mom to a second child. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and my son is now 8 weeks old. And so I'm in a really fortunate position to be able to have a great maternity leave from Next, and really appreciative of that. But I think one of the things that I have found, so prior to being at Pinterest and Google, I was on the advertising agency side. I was both at Razorfish as well as I was at Gray. I see Desiree said, congratulations, thank you so much. And so I actually really didn't think that much about challenges, specifically being a woman within the marketing space, until maybe I shifted and became a little bit more of a senior leader. Because one of the things that I found is, as a woman early on in my career, I was able to have the same opportunities. I was actually lucky enough to have female mentors and great female colleagues that sort of paved the way. So I didn't really see a noticeable change until I started to become more senior. And I started to see how as you became more senior, there were less and less women within the marketing and advertising space. And so again, I do want to do a quick shout out to my current employer, Next, because the CMO of Next is Melanie Chase. She is formerly VP of Marketing at Fitbit, and she's a total badass and a really great mentor and leader. So love seeing that. And then our CFO is also a wonderful leader. She recently joined from Airbnb. So it's great to have female mentors, but in the absence of female mentors, when you're in a position where you don't have that, I think it's really important to model the behavior that you believe is right. So there's not everyone is lucky enough to have those female leaders within their presence, but that doesn't mean that you need to then change the way you act or change the way you behave. There's a little bit of gut and intuition in terms of leadership style. One of the things that I felt early on was Steve Jobs as a leader was always known for being kind of brash and having like a very specific disposition. And I always wondered, well, if I lead with empathy as a leader, will people not respect me? Will people not think of my decision as authentic and true because I'm not leading with an iron fist? I'm trying to keep an open mind. And what I found as I progressed in my career is that's not the case. People actually really value empathetic leaders, and there is a role for that type of person. But I think whatever the leader is, whatever your personality type is, being true to that specific element of yourself is the reason you're hired on. People and companies, they value women in leadership because of the diversity and perspective that they're able to bring. And so I think it's really important to not feel like you need to adjust the way you are just to fit in with other male counterparts or other people within your executive team. You bring your own unique perspective, and that's the most critical part of being valued as a leader within your particular organization.
No, and you definitely said a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first off, obviously having a mentor, somebody you can kind of respect, and and modeling good behavior. I mean, as a parent, my two daughters are about the same age difference as yours is, so trust me, it gets a lot easier. After you get through the first number of months, but it's modeling good behavior. And it's just modeling the behavior of mentors that you have above you. And you touched upon something that's definitely very, very dear to all of us right now is empathy, right? Leading with empathy. And, fortunately or unfortunately, it's the old school model of management, it is not really that way. And, luckily that's changing, right? And especially with everything we have, it's been going on the last 30 years in all of our lives, empathy, and looking at more of, servant leadership, and how do you help, and taking in open eyes, and especially nowadays too, it's you can't, the aspect of being in an office every day is more about control, versus open empathy and understanding. And if people are going to want to be successful, they're going to be, and as leaders help them, and being able to kind of help them grow as leaders and whatnot. So we hit upon some amazing points, obviously, for the group is empathy, mentors, and modeling behavior. Let's talk a little bit more about next, because I see the excitement, in your face, and obviously what you've been able to build a little bit. In terms of, you work with a lot of business owners, from bakeries to food trucks. How does how do these customers find you guys? How are you looking to service them? And ultimately, obviously this is a women in marketing panel, kind of having the focus on growing women and women related business owners is always going to be a positive thing too,
Yeah, absolutely, Todd. So I mentioned that we launched our social channels. We relaunched them in September of last year. And as we were doing, so we actually did a brand refresh for the Next Insurance brand with the Collins agency. And we really launched all of that work in addition to our social channels in September of last year. And it was a really nice brand moment for us because we were able to take all of the ethos and all of the kind of culture that we built internally and then flip it outside so that we were able to make it feel a little bit more external. So our founder and CEO at Next, Guy Goldstein, one of his real mission for the company is that we help entrepreneurs thrive. And the way that we have seen that, both our CMO, Melanie, and then also Spencer Hansen, our creative director, and myself, we've all kind of worked together and with the leadership team, made sure that ethos, that mission is not only part of the way that we market and advertise to external people, but it's also the way we do business internally. And so when we think about that, that comes to play in the way that we do business. So all of our swag is bought from small business owners. And so we actually did a collaboration with Stuzo. Joni is one of the founders of Stuzo, and she has done a really beautiful job with developing some great collaborations and swag for us, where we're able to actually put our Next logo, but then also make sure that all of these products are exactly what we want to be. It tells the story of the small business owner, and then what we do is we put that out on our social channels. So Stuzo is a retail shop that has a combination of it has a combination of like sweatpants, sweatshirts, and then a variety of other retail apparel. And then we've also done collaborations and shout outs with the Syrup Shop, which is a Filipino food truck, with Rosalind Bakery, which is a bakery out in San Francisco. And what we do is once we work with them internally and once we kind of have this collaboration, then what we do is we highlight them on social channels. So we have an Instagram story. So we make sure that other people, all of our following, then can also see what great work and what collaborations we're doing, and then they can support those small businesses. So yes, to your point, we have a special focus on women small business owners. We're also looking at Latina and Latino owned businesses, and then Black owned businesses. And we really are looking to essentially take our customers who are the heroes of the next story and then highlight them and bring them up. At the end of the day, Next Insurance is just an insurance company. We're doing some really interesting and innovative things, but we're not the hero of the story. Our small business owners are, and we want to flip the script and make sure that those small businesses are the ones that we highlight across all of our different external channels, so that our customers can see that we really care about the customer and we really care about people like them.
No, and that's awesome. I mean, obviously the amplification through social media, helps them, and it just shows you're moving and above the transactional relationship from being an insurance company to being a truly partner within the growth of these community and growth and kind of finding this community. So it's, when you can obviously do good, it's always makes things more beneficial for the partners you work with,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, talking about, obviously since this is, tying it back to, being a women focused session, like, can you talk about overcoming adversity, and also too, balancing, being a woman and a working mom? And thank you for obviously doing this, being on maternity leave. I know the brand innovators community says thank you. But yeah, advice you can give, this is like, it's the age old struggle of balancing, balancing both. I want this to be collaborative and innovative for, to help the whoever's tuning in, just advice that you've given, seen how you've been able to balance, being an executive as well as a working mom.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of advice that I would give, the feeling when I started my career, I will be really honest with you. I'm an ambitious person. I am looking to make an impact and really really drive some type of impact on consumers that we work with. So that was the case when I was at Pinterest, where we were trying to get people offline and trying to get people to find and discover the creativity within them and connect with the people that they love. The same thing at Google, where we were looking to bring the world the right answers and the right solutions to make their lives a little bit better, a little bit easier. And really, that's definitely the case at Next. So, but that being said, as a mom and as a wife, what I have found is that careers are not always a ladder, and you don't always have to be climbing up to take the next step. One of the great pieces of advice that I heard is that you should really think about your career more like a jungle gym rather than like a ladder. A jungle gym where you can go horizontally, you can go a little bit diagonally, and sometimes you go down, and sometimes that's the right move for you. And so taking one step forward isn't always taking one step up. Oftentimes taking one step forward is just what you need at that moment of your life. So you don't always have to put your foot on the accelerator. Sometimes you can take a moment and breathe a little bit and just keep your foot off on neutral or hit the brakes, because that might be what you need as a woman, as a mom in that particular moment. And that doesn't mean that your entire career has shifted trajectory. What it means is you've taken a moment, you've done what's right for you, and you'll always be able to take the next step, whether that next step is diagonal or it's horizontal or it's forward or up. You're always able to do that, but you don't have to feel the pressure to continue to climb.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. Traditionally it's those folks that had their whole lives mapped out when they were 20, 21 in college have been sadly mistaken in their 30s and 40s. And, it's competing with yourself. And to your point, being true to yourself and living your truth, and ultimately having empathy. I mean, I think, besides obviously finding mentors, let's say there's somebody that's 22, 23, wants to get into marketing. What advice would you give, a woman kind of coming in, you had the opportunity, you said, to kind of work in an ad agency and, get great mentors, is there advice you'd say, like for a woman kind of coming into for the marketing ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. So as a younger person, like I actually think that sometimes finding the right mentors is really difficult to do. It's a time consuming thing. And I know that there's always conversations like you need to find other women to help lift you up. I also think sometimes you are able to lift yourself up by thinking about the work that you do as a collection of experiences. So in the case that you don't have someone who is a mentor, or in the case that you don't have another woman around you, it's not always a complete detriment. It's not that you won't be successful. What I would recommend is think about the work that you do and think about how you're collecting a series of experiences, and use those experiences to start to nurture and discover what are the things that you love and what are the things that you can apply. So really kind of a little bit of a spotlight on my own background, but by no means was a straight trajectory. When I was in undergraduate school, I studied neuroscience, and I just assumed that I would be a doctor because my mom was a doctor, and I'm a good Indian kid, and that was what I assumed that I would do. And marketing wasn't really within the realm of something that I would ever consider. And so I did neuroscience in undergraduate, and I decided that I didn't want to go into research, which is like a very common career path for someone who graduates in neuroscience. So I did consulting. And after I did consulting, I was like, what am I going to do with this neuroscience background? And then I went into consulting, and I was like, I think it's great to do consulting, but that particular job for me, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing forever. But what I realized is, in retrospect, in neuroscience, I was able to take a whole series of pieces of data points, and I was able to start connecting those dots of those data points. And that's something that's extraordinarily relevant to my everyday life in marketing. And when I was doing consulting, I realized that I learned how to crunch large Excel databases. And I was like, what am I going to use large Excel databases for if I want to go into marketing and I really want to do creativity? And what I found is, when I'm looking at ad effectiveness, I'm able to go in and actually take a look at the numbers myself and then do some analysis myself, so that I'm able to understand what's going on when I'm looking at how effective a creative campaign is. So sometimes you don't know what the experience is, like how that's going to contribute to a change of perspective or your end career goal. But if you think about just collecting different experiences, again, same thing, not following that direct career path, but really thinking about exposing yourself to different experiences, I think that is the best way for you to add value in the future job, the future career, the future team that you're going to be on.
Collecting experiences versus stuff. Now, I had a very similar background. I got 2 degrees. I was going to be a lawyer, like a good Jewish boy, and picked up my parents said, I want to go into business and marketing. They're like, whatever, just graduate in 4 years. So, the linear path, and it was challenging the fear of change. I think, as we get older, being more adaptable and accepting of change. Versus when you're young, you expect this and you look at yourself as somewhat of a failure versus saying it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail, from a human standpoint. So totally empathize. And, I'm sure you're glad you're not a neuroscientist and a doctor, and I'm glad I'm not a lawyer right now,
High five to that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think, kind of helping the community a little bit more. Are there certain resources, communities that you're involved in that's kind of specifically that help women, groups that, you can possibly advise to? And, feel free, anybody that wants to jump in, questions for Rashi. Probably don't have any questions for me, but more questions for Rashi. Just type it in and we'll definitely get them answered. There's some resources you can recommend for women to kind of help build a support community?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of my resources and community building are a little bit non-traditional, but I have found Slack to be a tremendous place where moms connect with other moms, and then also some of our classic Facebook groups. So one of the things that I work really hard at is try and make sure that I'm up to date with what those different communities are. So I participate in the Slack local moms group in Brooklyn, which is where I'm based out of. I'm also part of the Moms in Tech Facebook group, which is another really, really wonderful resource. But making sure that when you think about these communities, that you're not just engaged online, but that you're taking the time to get offline and be able to meet some of these people and be able to share some of the resources. Like one of my big philosophies when it comes to being a woman in marketing is that you have to stay curious. I think it's the death of us as marketers if you're not staying curious, you're not hearing and researching what are the consumer trends that are happening within the world. I found this at Pinterest, Google, and at Next is we want to make sure that we're not just staying in the bubble of our own organization because we'll miss what's happening. And so making sure that you're reading, staying curious, but then making those connections in person, talking to people people on a day-to-day basis, not just on Slack, not just on Facebook, but also in the real world. When you go to a restaurant, I know it's a little harder now with the new variant and making sure that you're doing so in a safe way, but really thinking about how you can connect with people in a one-to-one way. I think that that's so important, and making sure that you're learning about other people and not just talking about yourself, but also staying curious about the world around you. That's all really critical. So I would definitely recommend people find the resources that are available within their local community using tools like Slack and Facebook groups, but then also taking that extra effort to go offline and continue to meet people who are not necessarily always like you, but may offer a different perspective.
No, and that's, and it comes to more intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic, right? You got to push yourself, and, even on a management level, working with people that, want to be able to grow themselves and push themselves versus just being kind of content. And those are good lessons for our children too, right?
Exactly. Very true.
Curiosity found the cat. So can you talk a little bit more, obviously, like kind of with next, some of the things you're looking at for the future, kind of future thinking, what's next for next in terms of channels, in terms of things that you're excited about, as you kind of push the brand out there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're in this really special spot right now at Next, where we have pushed out our brand refresh. The way that the philosophy of the business now is apparent in the way that we're talking to our external consumers and small business owners. And so that's really special. But now what our opportunity is to just continue to amplify, continue to tell our story across all of our different channels. And so you'll continue to see some really interesting work coming through across Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. Of course, we're working with influencers. TikTok is a channel that we're starting to explore a little bit more, and we're really excited about. I think what we found on TikTok is that there's a really passionate group of small business owners. And I think that speaks to whatever your audience might be, that there are pockets of really passionate segments. And it goes a little bit to what we saw in early days of YouTube, where there are these micro influencers, and those micro influencers, it's not always about followers or total volume of posts. It's like these people that are hyper engaged and hyper interested. And so you can find that on TikTok. We've also seen some interesting pockets of something like that existing across, like when you think about smaller influencers in Instagram. And so we've been working really hard to develop what our presence is across that. And then also making sure that we're continuing to beat the drumbeat of making sure that people realize that small businesses are ultimately at the heart of our community and the heart of the way we do business. And so it's so important to support local, to think about your community, to think about the coffee shops that you go to on a day-to-day basis that just make your community more special, and how we can continue to raise those types of businesses up, and make sure that they are getting the attention and the resources that they need, so they continue to help nurture and foster our individual communities.
Yeah, I mean, and it's obviously for small business has been quite a bit of challenge over the last number of years, and to show that somebody cares, that as an insurance company is definitely, I think in marketing they call it stickiness in the long run. It makes their switching costs a little bit stronger when you have that emotional attachment to a brand. So I mean, I think obviously anybody jump in with questions like, what are you excited about, obviously besides seeing the children grow up, both personally and professionally over the next 6 to 12 months, or even longer than that, 6 to 12 months happens like a blink of an eye.
It totally does. But I will confess that resolutions for 2022, like resolutions for 2021 last year, I had this sense of optimism, and I am keeping a low bar this year. I want to make sure that we're walking into the new year with reasonable expectations and a philosophy of being able to try and be flexible as opposed to overly ambitious to what the world may bring us, because in these times it's just really hard. It's really hard to know what's going to happen. And so I think maintaining mental health, mental wellness, being kind to myself. One of the things I actually learned about over the course of last year, and I don't know if people have heard this phrase or not, but really thinking deeply about this idea of toxic positivity. I always pride myself in being a positive person, but I started reading about this idea of toxic positivity and the fact that it can be so harmful for the people that you surround yourself with, because it lacks empathy, which is something that we talked about a little earlier. And so how do you go into the next 6 to 12 months feeling excited about the future and planning and looking forward to future events, but also being empathetic to the people around you and not being a perpetrator of that toxic positivity, I think is really important. Other things that I just want to throw out that I'm really excited about and don't know if it'll be in the future of Next, but it's something that just personally, I think is really interesting is I have been really fascinated with the emergence of NFTs and how other marketers are using NFTs. I think this is just like a really interesting space. And I really love to see it. And then the other thing I've been really excited, and this probably will come through in some of our next work going forward, is this idea that working hard, doing the day-to-day grind this is not the only way to live your life, and really thinking about that work-life balance and mental health and how mental health can play into your day-to-day. This trend of like wellness is something that I think is really important. And as a supporter of small businesses, it's something that we feel really strongly about, that people, small business owners who are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that they are also taking a little bit of time for mental health and for wellness as well. I think those are also really important trends that we hope to continue to see and drive forward in the rest of 2022 and probably beyond that.
Yeah, no, it's learning to be good to ourselves and looking at our children every day and saying, how the heck did you make it through this pandemic? You know, they're the rock stars and we just support them. I mean, you did talk about NFTs, which is probably the new fancy buzzword. And I know Microsoft just bet $67 billion on acquiring Activision to somewhat integrate NFTs. So it's probably not a segment that's going to drop down anytime soon, more than anything. So, I mean, you did raise a point. I see some comments, in the chat, talking about challenging fear, the jungle gym. I mean, we've got a lot of content. You've given the community an amazing things and a lot of takeaways. Just kind of coming in and, I mean, what did, besides that, what advice would you tell your kids kind of coming into marketing? We want to get into marketing. What would you tell them? And, either yes or no, or go be a doctor or a lawyer,
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think that, and now I have 2 kids. And so being able to see like kind of differences, even with my nieces and nephews, seeing like little personalities come out is really interesting. And so I think one of the things that one of the points that my parents always kind of departed to me was being true to yourself. You work hard, you will find success when you're passionate about something. And so really thinking about what your passion is and also really appreciating your day-to-day, I think is the most important thing. This is extraordinarily cliche, but I'm a real believer. I love setting goals, but I don't live on a day-to-day basis for the goals that I hope to achieve. I live on a day-to-day basis for the experiences and for the journey. And so for me, that's one of the most important things that I hope to impart to my children, is that that magic is in the day-to-day moments. It's not in the things that you've accomplished. And I hope that is something that we all within the marketing space, within this industry, we can all start to realize is it's not necessarily just about the achievements, the things that you have on paper. It's about really loving those individual moments and loving the process of getting there.
Yeah, I mean, life happens in between, so it's just, taking pride in that. You talk about passion too. It's, you can look at even from a management perspective. If somebody's not passionate, it's, like go do something else. And, there was a famous quote in the play Rent, how time flies when the passion dies. So, you can see it, even being remote with your staff, I'm sure you can see people that are inspired, just kind of leveraging that energy, and just kind of showing that you're passionate behind the brand. And I mean, I think we have 4 more minutes. Definitely if anybody has any questions, pop them in, any kind of key ultimately takeaways that you want to, given the community. We did cover a significant amount of content in a very short amount of time. And
yeah. Well, one thing I also do want to articulate is, so this is a women in marketing event, but one of the things that we have found that's extraordinarily important is making sure that we're lifting up all points of view and all perspectives. And so D&I becomes really important, but we also I really like this shift of calling it moving away from diversity and really shifting into inclusion. And it's something we talk a lot about at Next. And it's something we really think about when we're talking about these small businesses that we like to focus and spotlight, is that we're making sure that we're lifting up voices that may not have had a platform in the past. And so how can we continue to help support those people and also increase diversity within our leadership team and increase diversity within the marketing efforts that we do. And so that's one thing that I think is extraordinarily important. It's something obviously that's come to light in a little bit more focus over the past few years, just within the US and the way that we think about that. But I think as marketers, we really have this obligation to be harbingers of culture and really push that forward. And I think that we all have the ability to be allies. I think it might be a good way to close out this session is start with how we started it, where we talked about how Todd, you yourself are an ally. And I think that that's incredibly important, but we all have the ability to be allies. The concept of allies is not just thinking about and supporting different perspectives and different views, but also standing up for what you believe in, standing up and being inclusive and going that extra mile. I think that's really critical. And we all the people who are here, who are listening to this talk, we all are in this position, this really unique position to help push that message forward. And so I think that's just something that's really critical, is as we think about the campaigns that we're building, as we're thinking about the strategy that we're thinking about to drive our businesses forward and continue to make progress. I think really being inclusive and being really nuanced and specific about the people that you are supporting and how that has a downstream effect on the rest of the generation. I think that's just really critical and an important reminder.
No, this is awesome. Like this is so much made. Leanne, hopefully this is a good start to the day of content, our day in SoCal,
Wait, please don't leave yet. I have so much I wish that we could continue the conversation, except that I know that there are some other incredible sessions coming up. It was the best start to the day I think we could have had. Todd, really and truly, you are an amazing ally and a great moderator. You asked some great questions. Rashi, you just lit up, especially when you talked about the work you're doing on behalf of your end consumer at Next. And it's the small business, the entrepreneur. I could feel your passion come through the screen for that. And I appreciate that so much as a former entrepreneur myself, but also just understanding. And I was thinking as you were talking, there's an interesting analogy to female empowerment in general, where I think it sort of starts on a smaller scale with small individuals, small players, but then those individuals and communities start to gain more and more power. And that's when we gain the bigger power in society and all of the equality ultimately that we're striving for. So I just, and you both, the conversation was so great. There were just so many things that you said. I wish, again, I could recap it all, but also just lifting up the marginalized voices. That was an incredible piece. Todd, I think you might have mentioned, or you both discussed staying curious. It's so simple in so many ways, but just the curiosity in our careers and our lives and everything is so important. So I just want to thank you both so much. This was wonderful. And I just can't wait to keep talking about this conversation because I learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Rashi.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Okay, so let's see where we are next. That was, I hope everyone feels as inspired as I am. That was, I think, really wonderful. So like we've just been saying, a great start to our day. We have so many great things to come. Okay, so our next session is called Behind the Brand, which I don't know if anyone remembers Behind the Music on VH1, but Behind the Brand is very exciting to me because I do love to pull back a curtain and understand how things work from behind the scenes. So I think we're going to learn an incredible amount here. This is a Behind the Brand from the Stanley Black & Decker team. They're going to take us through their behind the scenes collaborative process, talk about their challenges and success stories all around how they bring great work to life. And they're going to be, it's a panel here, and they're going to be moderated by Trisha Tolley. She's the Director of Media Partnerships at CRISP. She'll be speaking with Ann Stringer, the Director of Brand Marketing at Stanley Black & Decker, Lauren Gallagher, the e-commerce content strategy manager, and Monique Evans, the systems operations manager. So a really great compendium of roles that we're going to be hearing from, and I'm really excited about that. Can you tell I'm really excited about everything today? I'm not going to stop speaking. But I will, it looks like everybody's here. So Trisha, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much. It's so great to be a part of a conversation with you all. So let's start with how you know one another and what made you want to be a part of today's conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. So first of all, I'm so honored to be here. I love what Brand Innovators does to connect marketers all around the world. I was lucky enough to be nominated as a 40 under 40 this year. And I have brought with me two amazing colleagues, Monique and Lauren, and they'll tell you about themselves. I've been in marketing for 17 years. And spent half my career agency side in the creative world, and then 7 years at Stanley Black & Decker doing creative, digital, and now brand marketing. So I'm so pumped to talk today, and I'll kick it over to Monique to introduce herself.
Thank you, Anne. It takes a minute to actually turn yourself off mute. You would think 2 years into this, I would be better at it, but I am Monique Evans, and I have had the pleasure to work with Anne throughout her years at Stanley Black & Decker. We kind of overlap every once in a while, but I have been with SBD for 12 years now, which is crazy for me to say. I started as a graphic designer and kind of traveled throughout that world until I became a project coordinator, then a systems analyst, and whatever I am today. It's kind of a hybrid of many different hats.
Love that.
And hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Gallagher. I've actually been with SBD for about 2.5 years now. Previously, I spent about 10 years in the Baltimore ad agency space, working with Anne in a few different settings, actually a few different companies. And I've had the chance to work with Monique, you know what I mean, in our roles now. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, Forbes recently recognized Stanley Black & Decker as a top female-friendly company. Can you share what it's like to be a part of this organization?
Yeah, great. So being with the company almost 7 years, I've seen some incredible transformation, especially in the last 2 years. I would say that we have some of the most exceptional female leaders who have recently taken on roles as presidents in the GTS business, which is the division that Monique and Lauren and I all sit in. And I think that Stanley Black & Decker has done an incredible job with diversity, equity, and inclusion, integrating ERG groups and really helping us all bring our whole selves to work. I personally am involved in the Women's Network, which also connects very closely with the Working Parents Group, and that's for anybody who's a parent. And then I'm a board member of the Pride and Allies group. So it's an awesome way to connect with people outside of the day-to-day, especially in Zoom world where you're not in an office anymore. And it's an amazing way to create connections with people to build your personal board of directors, which I can talk about a little more later.
Awesome.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Anne, just because I've seen that transformation as well, being here for so long. And the ERGs, a lot of companies didn't have ERGs 10 years ago, right? Like that wasn't even a term that people knew. But those have brought so many folks together, and I'm also a part of a few. And the beauty of it is that you can also be an ally. So even if you aren't a part of that group yourself, you probably have friends or coworkers that are, so you're able to join those groups and kind of learn how to just be better for those and more supportive for those individuals. I think the other thing that I just wanted to add, kind of like what Anne said with like the leaders being present, it's sometimes you join a company and you see, oh, my manager is a woman, but you don't really see anyone in like that high level that is female. So you kind of decide, okay, that's where my ceiling is. I probably will only make it to director here, and then I'm going to have to go elsewhere. So the fact that you see these women that have had long careers throughout and they've actually moved up into president, it allows you to be like, okay, I can grow, and this is my forever home, if you will.
That actually was one of the first things that I realized about the company, that I, had a different bias when I was coming in. I thought that there would be a lot of male dominance in here, given the space and the industry that we're in. But seeing how many female leaders we had was kind of very surprising and exciting to me, because to Monique's point, I feel like there's so much opportunity to grow and there is no kind of ceiling of where you can go.
That's incredible. So for those who might not yet have these top-down initiatives at their respective workplaces, what would you suggest they do to help women in marketing?
I think that if you're going to, try to instill change, or change is scary to everybody, and especially trying to think about organizational change and shift, I think there's small things you can do. Lead by example. So I think if you're, pitching or proposing something, that you can kind of put that into practice in small ways so that you can kind of baby step your way into kind of getting people to buy in. So if you're talking about flexibility for working parents, if you have, the opportunity and you're managing people that are parents, see about a flexible work day, see about, do they have a day where they don't have any Zoom meetings so that they can kind of pick up their kids or things like that. So I think there's small ways that you can put that into practice and represent those kind of things that you're trying to work through.
I would add to that too, Lauren. I love what you were saying. We have a leader at Stanley Black & Decker. Her name is Tracy Myers, and she founded our very first internal studio team in the marketing group. And Tracy says, you permit what you promote, which means, if you're telling, as a leader, you're telling your staff that they shouldn't work nights and weekends, and then you're working nights and weekends, it sets a really bad example. And so, I think it's really important for folks to set boundaries and politely remind folks of those boundaries. We have a really great cultural rollout that we did last year called Focus Fridays. So in corporate America, this was something I had to get used to many years ago. Our schedules are nuts. Today alone, I have 9 meetings. This is my 5th meeting of the day.
Wow.
And so what's so beautiful about Focus Fridays as a corporate initiative is they encourage us not to have meetings on Fridays and to really focus on ourselves, focus on continuing development, continuing education. We have all kinds of amazing online learning platforms that Stanley Black & Decker offers us complimentary. Monique and I have actually taken a couple together. So it's really important that, like, if the business gives you an opportunity, that you take it and you don't, accept meetings on Fridays when people send you meetings. And sometimes that's really hard to do, but it goes back to that discipline thing and that setting expectations.
What's this I hear about Outlook calendars and the default settings for meetings?
Yeah, so that's a new thing, but I love it. It's one of those where, again, respecting those boundaries and hours, and corporate actually took it upon themselves not only to say, like, you should start having shorter meetings. That's easy to say, and people are like, okay, yeah, sure. But they actually worked with IT, and we now, whenever we make a meeting, it defaults, like if you're trying to do a half hour, it defaults to 25 minutes. You have to actually intentionally type in 1:30 in order to get that extra 5 minutes. Same if you're trying to do an hour meeting, it defaults to like 45 minutes. So the fact that our company is instilling, not just saying make a shorter meeting, but they actually made it more difficult for you to have an hour-long meeting, which in Anne's case, when you have 9 meetings in a day, which I would never do that to myself, but more power to you.
I was on vacation last week, so I'm, catching up.
But yeah, at least now she can get a 5-minute bathroom break and a 15-minute break in between that 45 minutes to actually like be a human again.
That
Yeah.
is so awesome.
I was going to say too, they also added kind of a forced like agenda so that you have to explain what the meeting is about and what the expectations are, which I remember talking to Monique a while back and she said, if you send me a meeting invite with no context and no details, I can't prioritize that. And so that's one of those boundaries I think that Anne was referencing where, I mean, our company is supporting those types of, cultural initiatives to say, I have boundaries, like we have to be clear with each other and respect all of the time in the 9 meetings that you have throughout the day.
Yeah. And I will say that it's hard to set up those boundaries, right? Like I am someone, as Lauren said, that has strong work boundaries and people know it and they respect it now, but it wasn't always that way. You have to build them up and then also adhere to it. As soon as you start making exceptions, like, I decided last year that I wasn't going to do meetings on Mondays anymore. I was like, Focus Fridays are great, but I also need days that I can just devote to getting my job done. So, the first couple of meetings come in and you're like, oh, it's only a half hour. I'll just take it. It's fine. Maybe they didn't notice that it's in my email signature, but like, no, I actually had to make that boundary with myself to be like, hey, this meeting, like, can we move it to Tuesday? I see, and I'll do the work of being like, there's an opening Tuesday at 3:00. Let's move it to that. So at least, I'm not just saying like, nope, it's Monday. I don't do that meeting. I do work with them, but I still respect my own boundary of not having a Monday meeting.
That's great. How do you think about advocacy and how for yourself, and how do you continue to push you and others on the team?
I think this is a really interesting question. And actually the 3 of us were talking about it before because it's really hard. I think it's hard to kind of promote yourself and it feels a little bit selfish. And I think as women, we tend to want to build others up and we take on all these things, but we feel like it's wrong in some way or that it kind of is, again, selfish if we're self-advocating. So I think, there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of like courses, personal development, how do you handle some of those things? And one thing that I try to do is, I would go to bat for Monique and Anne to say, hey, I've advocated for them and said they deserve this. They'd be great for this project. So I try to separate myself a little bit and say, if this was my friend or this was my peer, what would I be saying about them? I shouldn't change or manipulate that because, it's less comfortable. So I think kind of trying to make sure that what would you say if that was your peer that needed that advocacy?
We're so much harder on ourselves than others always. For me, I think something that's been really helpful in my career too is to build your own personal board of directors. So, I think about our Stanley Black & Decker board of directors and how that works and how much support we get from them as a company. In my career, I found that having support at a peer level, at a senior executive level really helps to not only mentor, but also advocate for. And Monique, you've talked about this a lot. Just getting the support to have somebody be a sounding board for you, but also speak on your behalf is critical when you know what you want. And so, one of the best things I did for myself was sit down and take some time and determine, what I really want to do in 5 years. And I refer to it as, what do you want to be when you grow up? So one of our presidents at Stanley Black & Decker, her name is Allison Nicolaitis. She's the president of our power tools business in GTS. She says it's really important to define what you want, because if you don't know what you want, other people aren't going to know. And if you don't know how to talk about it, other people can't advocate for you. So I think that is critical, and it has really helped me shift my career. I actually took a note from the last session. Rashi talked about career growth and it being more of a jungle gym than a ladder. And for me, I've thought of it a lot in the last 2 years with COVID as like, kind of a playground in general. Because I was a creative for many, many years and managed creative teams. And when COVID hit and I couldn't see my friends anymore and I had no social life, I was like, I think I'm going to go back to school. And what am I going to do in school? So, I decided after, really thinking about it and talking to some leaders that I really admire, that I want to be a CMO when I grow up. And that's scary. Like, that's really scary to say out loud. And I can't do that today. I can't go, I need more experience in a couple key areas. I'm currently taking an accounting class, and that's actually fun. I'm like, what? But I think when you know what you want, you don't have to know how to get there. You build support to help you understand what you need. And so I think that that's super, super critical.
How are you all thinking about sponsors in that area?
Yeah. I love sponsorship, right? Like, so many books and TED Talks and things tell you about mentors and how important it is to have a mentor. And I'm not knocking mentorships. I'm a part of a mentorship program at SBD, but it is so vital to also seek sponsors. And your mentor could be your sponsor, but it doesn't have to be. And your sponsors are truly just the people that are in those rooms where you're not, and they're speaking well on your behalf. So kind of like what Lauren was saying, the fact that I know that if an opportunity comes up and she knows that I fit that characteristic, she can also say like, hey, did you think about Monique for that? Right? Like, it's just as simple as that. And it kind of goes to what Anne was saying as well of, being intentional of what you want to be when you grow up. So that way you have people that are sponsoring you on your behalf, or at least advocating what you actually want in your life, and not trying to send you down some path that you didn't want to go down. But it's like, oh, I guess this is the only thing I can do, which is no. But also kind of what else Anne was saying reminded me of my own journey, where like I have had many jobs at SBD where I was the only one who did it, and we kind of made up a title for it. So we didn't always have traffic managers or project managers or any type of organization when it comes to project management, which I'm sure is crazy to believe that a company this big, but we were able to work autonomously, and everyone did their job, and you didn't really need the organization until you realized that you did. Where it's like, oh, this would be so much easier if your creative person could just focus on the creative, and there was somebody else that's chasing down the deadlines and the missing information and all of that jazz. So, I was able to be one of the first traffic coordinators, which then became a project coordinator role, which now a couple iterations later, I'm managing like our project management system, which is not what graphic designer Monique thought was in her career at all, right? Like, I was very happy of just doing layout design and that being my bread and butter until I retired or had to learn a new skill. But now I am like dreaming even bigger of like, well, where else can this go? What else is there in like this tech marketing space? Like, does that exist kind of thing? And maybe it doesn't, but I'm okay with being the first.
Well, you make such a good point where it's paving your own way. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that it's not an opportunity.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that me and Lauren were talking about earlier today of just, if you think about it, the internet is not what the internet used to be when we were all in school, right? Like graphic design and digital design and now motion graphics and e-com, like e-com wasn't a word back then. So Lauren now has an entire career around e-com. So like sometimes you do have to pave that way.
Yeah, I would say in terms of sponsorship too, depending on the size of your company or the business that you're in, it really does get important, especially in a company our size. We can't be in all the places, and, those types of sponsorships really bridge connections for you and kind of get your foot in the door. I know the role that I'm in now, Anne was the one who kind of put that idea in kind of a team's head, and I didn't even know it was available. So it's kind of having those sponsorships and having that support system and network is, critical.
And what what areas of focus do you have currently, whether it be specific skill sets of focus, or tell me what that looks like?
So for me, my role right now is really focused on how we evolve our e-commerce content. So how can we start taking different technologies and infusing them into e-commerce? Can we use augmented reality? Can we have a more personalized interactive experience that connects with that end user? And then further from that, it's really, how do we actually measure that performance? Is our content working? Does it actually resonate with people? So figuring out how we test and optimize and can kind of continuously improve. And then I would say, you know, personally, it's just been a good experience to see a different side of the business. When I first started, we were in that studio team that Anne mentioned that Tracy led earlier, and this has exposed me to a totally different side of the business. And so I'm brushing up on a lot of things that I did not think that I would be, from finance to kind of operating and things like that.
I have had the privilege this year of rebranding and relaunching a power tool brand. I never in a million years thought I would be as passionate about power tools as I am. This past fall, we relaunched the Porter Cable brand, which is a cordless power tool brand at a retailer all around the US called Tractor Supply Company. So we worked really closely with them to build a marketing campaign and launch this awesome product line to more people that are more DIY focused than pro. I'll say it that way. But what I love about our company is that if you can dream it up and you can articulate it, our leaders listen. And you know, I feel like I have this side hustle that really keeps me driven at SBD, and that's building internal teams that I've either had experience managing or working with at agencies, or I see holes where there's opportunity and I get to help pitch to build those teams and run those teams. So if you can dream it, we have a really interested, engaged leadership team who is listening. And I think we've gone through a ton of transformation because our leaders listen, and, you know, we're always evolving. So I'll stick around as long as they'll have me. Like I couldn't ask for a better job right now. I'm so pumped to work where we do and to work with such amazing people like Lauren and Monique.
That's incredible. Let's talk vulnerability at work, and specifically vulnerability in women. What are your thoughts?
I used to look at vulnerability as almost kind of a drawback, professionally speaking. You know, I think that I've experienced moments where asking questions in a role or a company actually kind of could be used against you. It could kind of make it seem like you didn't know what you were talking about, or you weren't kind of meant for that role. And, you know, especially coming here, I learned that's not true. Like, you need that vulnerability and you need to be open, and especially in a virtual environment, you have to build that trust and kind of get to know people on a more human level. So I think that vulnerability is a keystone to kind of getting success out of your team. So if you can build that relationship with the team and be open, and, you know, way back when I first started, you know, Monique is super busy and I had to work in this platform that she was managing. I've never used it before. And I just level set with her and said, hey, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I know you're really busy. I know that I am not on your priority list at all, but here's my situation, and like, I need your help so that I can be successful. And she was like, I got you. And so she took the time out, and she was like, because I was vulnerable, and I kind of went to her and said, I need your help, you know, or else it's going to hold me back. You know, she spent the time helping me build something and learn a different tool that would be successful for me. So like, that's a great example of how, if you can just be open and not be afraid of that it can really help, you know, change the trajectory and build relationships.
Yeah. And I think on the other side of that, right? Like I had no idea that Lauren was like humbling herself and coming to me. Like it's one of those things where for me, that's just another person that needed additional training, right? Like I didn't see it as any sort of negative. There wasn't anything to like weaponize against her. And it was just like, no, that's not like my A, B, or C, but it is somewhere on my list of like, if people aren't able to use this system, then the system itself doesn't work, right? So, for me, it was one where like, of course I'll help you. Like that's what I'm here for. So I think that's a great lesson for anyone that is hesitant to kind of, raise their hand or ask that additional question, or just be frank and honest and be like, everything you just said went over my head. Can I get additional help? Because, we don't know what we don't know, right? So if you're always sitting there nodding your head, then people are going to assume that you're following along. And so it's like, ask the question up front when there's still time to actually figure it out, instead of just be like, I guess I'll figure this out and I'll just do something. And then it's completely wrong and everybody's time is now wasted and it's a crunch and a rush and, all of those things that, of course, none of us have ever had to deal with before, which I personally have. So it's one where like, be vulnerable to ask those questions, but also like personally, when I look at like vulnerability, it's also authenticity, right? Of like bringing your full self. And, the example I give is like your first day of work, you probably were not your full self, right? You probably came back home or turned off Zoom and was just like, who was that person in that meeting? Like, I don't know them. That's not me. I don't know what that was. And, part of it's just nervousness, but also it's like, I don't really know these people. I don't know what the culture is. Am I going to fit in? Are they going to like me? So the more you can get out of your head, get out of your own way and just, learn how to have that courage to really present yourself, the more like empowered you're going to be, because then you are your full self and you just kind of are just acting naturally.
Yeah, I was going to say vulnerability is really kind of like creating an environment for the other people, right, to be vulnerable with you as well. So, right, earlier on in my career, I had a situation where I needed to work with a dev team and say, we have to send out this email for this client at a certain time. And I dropped the ball and I ran downstairs to our dev team and I said, hey, this is my fault. I dropped the ball in this. Do any of you guys have time to stick around and help me out? If you don't, I understand. But, I kind of laid it out there for them again. And they were more than willing to help out because it humanizes things. And I think if you can lead by example, like I was talking about earlier, it really starts creating that kind of community where you guys have each other's back. And, it's kind of that you can kind of dig in and help out people.
Something we hear a lot at work is always assume positive intent. And I think both of your examples are a great show of that thought. If you're being authentic and you're assuming positive intent, we're all just here to help each other. We all work for the same guy. It's like the more positive and supportive we can be, the better. And I think that vulnerability and tough situations build strength and definitely help us grow. Vulnerability equals growth, period.
Yes, so true. What's a valuable takeaway that you've learned that you would want to pass on to others here today?
I can kick this one off. I was enrolled in a program a couple of years ago called Sherpa Coaching. Brenda Corbett created it. Awesome female leader, if anybody wants to look her up. But what I learned from executive coaching was that strengths and weaknesses can be similar. So one takeaway there was your strengths overused can be your biggest weaknesses. And then also, I think in business, it doesn't matter what you do for a job. It could be, I worked at a flower shop in high school and college. Now I work in marketing, running a brand. It's the same. Behaviors and skills are equally important. So you can be the smartest person in the room who knows all the things, but if you're an asshole to work with and you don't assume positive intent, you're not going to get anywhere. And so being collaborative and assuming positive intent and being self-motivated and looking for ways to problem solve rather than complain, those are all things that are just as important as knowing Excel and knowing how to balance a spreadsheet or Photoshop or whatever. I think what's so interesting as a leader that I've experienced is it's easier to teach someone a skill than it is to help someone change a behavior. And so the work is equal on both sides. It's just, different sets of skills.
Yeah. And why are you so awesome? Why do we have to go after you? But no, I completely agree with what you're saying. And that's something that I remind my friends a lot of, like, especially when they're applying for new jobs. Like, I think Lauren was the one who was telling me the stat of, like, most men will apply for a job if they check like 6 out of the 10 boxes on the list, whereas most women will not apply for that job unless they check all 10, which is crazy. But it's one of those, like, I remind my friends all the time where I'm like, you are qualified, and most of the time, like, your first 30 days is them teaching you how to do your job. Like, I'm not saying to go apply for something that you have no business being in that room, but I'm saying give yourself a little grace and time and just know that, like, the ins and outs and the jargon and all of those things are teachable. But as what Anne was saying, like, your soft skills, those are the things that you can really develop and you bring with you. And that's what gives you that edge up among someone else. So, like, if both your resumes look exactly the same, you went to the same schools, you have the same degree, it's like, what else are we going to judge you on? And it's you as a person. Like, are you that self-starter? Are you the one that asks questions? Do you have the courage to be the only naysayer in the room? It's all those types of different things that aren't teachable in a way. Like, you can definitely take courses to learn how to kind of, like, boost those skills, but you have to figure out, like, what's intrinsically in you and how can I develop that and bring that out.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to take something away, one of the things that I learned, actually Anne had mentioned it to me when I started, but it's about bringing people along, right? So if you are, moving at warp speed and you assume that everybody understands what's happening behind you, you're probably missing something, or there's probably going to be a breakdown in some capacity. So I think bringing others along and slowing down enough to make sure that you're, kind of checking in with them and bringing them along to opportunities too. We were talking, Anne was going to be on this panel and she brought Monique and I along. She was like, this is a good opportunity. And so I think kind of slowing down, bringing other people along. And then to, I think, Monique's point earlier, a lot of roles that I've had in my career were roles that didn't really exist. They were like, this is a new thing. You can come in here and try to define it and things like that. And so I would say that, if don't try to limit yourself. If you see certain types of roles in your organization right now, it doesn't mean that you have to fit that role. If you see an opportunity, I think that, you can help shape that and mold that and figure out what makes the most sense. And, I guess the other thing would be that we're hard on ourselves, and sometimes 80% is good enough. It does not have to be perfect.
Amen.
Yes. You can just close that PowerPoint and be like, I don't care that it's misaligned. It'll be perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be 100%. We've all got a lot going on in professionally and personally. So give yourself a break, give yourself some grace, and, shoot for higher than you think that you should be, because you definitely can do more.
Such good points. How do you describe your women mentors, and how have they helped you along the way?
I was going to say, Monique mentioned it. I'm in a mentorship program at SBD. It's been amazing because it connected me with somebody that I probably wouldn't have met, or to this point, definitely wouldn't have worked with. And she's been able to teach me so much about the business and just so much about kind of her career and things that worked really well for her. But I look at mentorship almost as kind of, you can have a lot of different mentors, even if it's not an official title. So I think it's important that you have mentors or people that you admire or that you go to for advice or bounce ideas off of as your peers, or, you know, people that have been in a similar role. I think that looking at some of your friendships even as kind of mentors where they've helped you along the way and given you advice. So whether it's a formal process or not, I think developing your network and identifying who are those people that you can go to for support, to talk through, to get advice on, you know, what you should do. I think looking for mentorship is really important because you should be continuing to learn and kind of grow. So it's been great for me.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about the mentorship program is I don't work with these people ever, right? Just like how Lauren said, like both of my mentors are actually in corporate. So they are in completely different business units than me. Like we would not cross paths unless it was this or at an ERG. But the beauty of it is because they're so distant from what my day-to-day is, they ask questions, and they ask questions from a fresh perspective because they honestly don't know. They're just like, well, why can't you do that? And it's like, wait, why can't we do that? Hold on. So it's one where you do get to learn a lot more about yourself and your process, as well as kind of hear another story of like, how did this person get to where they were? What was their story? What was their journey? Like, obviously, I'm not going to take a similar path as them because, you know, like one's in HR and I have no, I love HR. I appreciate HR, but that's not the place for me. Right. So, you know, I'm not seeking out the mentorship to be like, I want to be you when I grow up, but it's also nice to just be like, how did you get to where you are and what were those steps and what did that look like? Because you can have a similar journey that might look like a jungle gym.
There are 3 gals that I really lean on at SBD for support. I mentioned 2 already. The last is Christine Potter. She was just appointed president of the Outdoor Product Group recently. And between Allison, Tracy, and Christine, I think the common theme, they're all very different leaders. They're all very different from me. And the common thread that I see is that they always put people first. And it's something that makes me want to show up. And it makes me want to do good work because I know they have my back. And I think if more leaders could lead by example in that way, we'd all be better off.
Yeah, and lead with empathy too, you know, again, that human kind of aspect of we're all working here, but everybody has all the stressors outside of here as well. So I think like having leaders that lead with empathy, it makes a huge difference in your work-life balance and your day-to-day.
I do think that's a silver lining of COVID. I think there are a couple, but all things considered, I think COVID has allowed us to have more grace and allow each other to have more grace because the world is a little bit in turmoil. Some of our leaders refer to it as a VUCA world, as a volatile place right now. And to just be able to meet people where they are, to bring the best version of themselves to work is a discipline and something that I hope we all can do more of because you never know what's happening at home. You never know.
Yeah.
And Monique, I think you've mentioned earlier, reminding ourselves to make time for others. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So it's one is where, you know, I can't say it enough, just being human. Like we are all humans. We have these human, very complicated lives, but like, you know, like what Lauren said earlier, where she was hesitant to come up to me because I'm so busy, right? Like everyone, you can say that about everyone, right? We're all busy, but we're still human. So like, especially in this virtual world where you might not have the 5 minutes where you're warming up something at the microwave and someone else stops by and you start talking about a TV show or whatever, you can still replicate that in this virtual world. Like you can send out a meme or just a hello or hey, I saw this and I was thinking of you via like Teams or Slack or Skype or whatever folks are using these days. And that goes such a long way, right? And if anyone, like no one is too busy for that. Like if you are so busy that you can't take 30 seconds to reply back, hey, that's a whole different issue that needs to be addressed, in a different panel, but it definitely should be addressed.
Yeah, I think being virtual is just you being a little more intentional too, being intentional because we're all busy and going from meeting to meeting. So being intentional about saying, hey, I just wanted to check in with you. Like, how are you doing? How was that project you were working on? How was your holiday? So I think to Monique's point, but it's just, you got to be intentional with making sure that you keep up those connections.
We have a question that I'll read here. What are some signals to look for in the interview process when assessing how female empowered the culture will be at an organization?
Yeah, I'll definitely take this one. So I always remind people that when you are interviewing, like you are also interviewing that company, right? So, when they ask, do you have any other questions? Like ask questions, like you are trying to figure out, or do you fit in just as much as they're trying to figure out, do you? And those are good times to just ask, like, what does your upper leadership look like? Maybe you can do a little bit of research on LinkedIn or whatever as well, but just trying to understand not only what does work-life balance or work-life integration look like, but ask those questions that are key to you so that you can make sure that one, it's a place that you really want to wake up and go to or log into every morning.
It's just like the behaviors and skills thing. I mean, you've got your job requirements on that job posting, but you also want to ask about the culture of the company because cultural fit is really important too. Stanley Black & Decker is really fast paced. That might not be for everybody. And so, you have to ask the right questions. I have this like 9-page document with a bunch of interviewer questions. They're all over the internet, so you can just search for it, but it'll give you some good ideas on certainly what to ask and how to ask it.
I would say too, figure out what values you're looking for in a company. What do you value the most? And then ask that question and see if that fits. If you value work-life balance or you value, having a beer fridge at the office or something like that, having fun. I mean, there's no wrong answer, but I think you need to make sure like you understand what your values are when you're going into that interview so that you can make sure you're asking the questions to see if it aligns.
Well, thank you all for the conversation. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for moderating.
Thank you.
I have to concur with Trisha. First of all, Trisha, thank you so much for moderating this powerhouse panel of women. I've learned, this was really interesting. I was furiously taking notes along the way. I think there were a lot of tactical takeaways here too. It occurred to me, no wonder you're, thanks to Forbes, one of the top female-friendly companies, because there's just so much here. I loved women as leaders. You permit what you promote. I thought that's, and then the discussion about boundaries that ensued, I thought that was really great. Focus Fridays for everybody listening. We should all go back to work and say we are doing Focus Fridays, because I just could really relate, as could every single person on this call. And I loved what you said about building your own personal board of directors. Again, like, let's take that back into our regular lives, everybody. And finally, all of the discussion around vulnerability just really spoke to me, because it's, I'm not purposefully trying to bring everything into the realm of female empowerment at the end of this, but things keep resonating in that way. And to me, you all described, I think it was Monique that said vulnerability leads to authenticity. And then that's where you come into your full power. So you gain strength actually through that vulnerability, which might be counterintuitive. And then we allow other people to be vulnerable when we're vulnerable, and then we build communities that way. So it just, wow, lots to think about, lots to take away. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day as I greet our next group of women to speak. Okay, so our next session is going to be a fireside chat. And I'm really excited about this one too. There's a theme to today. It's my excitement first and foremost. This wonderful event is going to be moderated by Courtney Ray, who's the Senior Director of Sales at Influential, which is really cool. And she'll be in conversation with Jamie Christ, who's the Senior Director of Partnerships at Super Coffee. And then Jamie will tell you a little bit more in the session about her really super interesting trajectory and everything going on. So do we have everybody? Okay, awesome. Take it away, ladies.
Yep. Thanks for that intro. Hi, Jamie. Glad to talk to you today. I didn't realize we were going to be twinning this morning.
That's so good. Yes.
I loved kind of, all of the things that were brought up on the last panel. So I think we can kind of start off, talk about Super Coffee. I think a lot of us on the call, including, Leanne was kind of just saying, are really excited about this brand specifically. So we can kind of chat through that and then move back into kind of the topic at hand. But to kind of kick things off, I am a huge Super Coffee fan. I actually saw a post about it on LinkedIn and then ended up trying it when I bumped into it at the grocery store. So I am a huge fan of the brand. But I would love for you to kind of just talk about what it's been like working at a really fast-paced, growing company, and kind of what has your strategy been to date?
Yeah. So I've been with the company just a little over a year, and, it's about 6 years old, and it's all hands on deck. And, what I love about the fast pace and just, getting our hands into it, I think we can move fast, right? We can get approvals pretty quickly. I was at a former company where the company grew pretty big and it got very corporate. And so you kind of lose that mobility of just be able to create things on the fly that you see in the moment, that you need to act pretty fast. And so we had a foundational marketing team when I joined, right before I joined. They just had our CMO, small digital team. And then throughout the year, we've brought on more people for brand marketing, data insights, and then our chief creative officer. So the team was rounding out. And I think, just keeping the team small and nimble was important. And communication was the biggest thing for us. And just thinking ahead and planning too. I think as a company that is a startup, it's a hard transition to make sure that the planning is in place. I think a lot of startups are just used to working on a fly, but once you get to a place like you become a little bit more productive and proactive if you have planning in place. And then by all means, you can still do these fun, disruptive moments that, you think ahead of just maybe if it's a month out or less than a month. And we did a couple of those. And then we also had our first national campaign that took months to prepare. But, I like the fast paced moving and just ways that you can just create amazing things on the fly and get the team all hands in and make sure you're still doing it right by all means. But it's been fun. And also too, with our sales team, I mean, just seeing the company growth as well. I think right before I started was maybe the 90th employee, and now we're about 140 people just in a year. So it's wild to see the growth. We opened a headquarters in Austin. They made some moves from New York City of moving that major headquarters down to Austin, and just seeing the brand just expand even more. It's been really incredible.
It's funny that you mentioned, what it's like to work at a startup. I think it's interesting because the benefit is you get to wear all of these different hats, and
Yes.
it's, very different than a traditional established business. But I like that you mentioned you get to kind of test and learn. Have there been initiatives or kind of strategies that you've really thought, oh, this is great, we have this ability to quickly test? Or have there been things that maybe haven't worked out quite to the degree, but have provided some good learnings on the back end?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's been these moments of, there's an example, we did something for National Coffee Day. And what we did is do page covers within the Seattle Times and the Boston Globe. And it all happened less than a month. We prepared it. Our chief creative officer came up with the idea and was like, why don't we just give, our competitors our recipe? We're on this mission to, shed, 5 million pounds of sugar in the American diet. It's a big focus for the company. We just announced our ACEs campaign today with our fellow brands who are, making sure that sugar is cut out of the diet. And so when we did that, we just made sure that all hands were on deck. For me, for partnerships, and a lot of our investors are celebrities too, making sure that they knew it was coming and just planning on the books, but then also friends of the brand. We have our brand ambassador group. So as we were moving real time to execute this idea, our chief creative officer was making sure from a content perspective that was delivered on time, but then also we communicated everything from our partnerships to our investors, brand ambassadors, but then also through PR all at the same time. And luckily we were able to get a pickup on Adweek. There's been, I would say through digital, I think this is you and I, Court, we're talking about this too. Like it's always like a test and learn through digital right now, right? Like there's continuously new trends. There's new things you have to test and try. And there's a lot of things through digital, we were working through our partners or just trying new things that it just didn't stick. And I think everybody's going through that right now. It's like, through TikTok or through Instagram, there's just these new trends continuously happening and just making sure you're doing it very in an authentic way of whoever the creator is, whoever the influencer is, and really making sure that works. So you're gonna fail. And, I think there's the process of understanding that failure too. And there's nothing wrong with it. I think a lot of people are afraid to fail in these companies. And, there's a lot of pressure to do the right thing or to nail it and make it great. Especially during the pandemic, a lot of people had to pivot and change, but it's like also too, you have to learn and to get better, you're going to have to fail, and that's okay too. But I think that the key part for that is, for a lot of marketing teams is to take the time to learn. At Super Coffee, we always talked about how we were just moving on to the next. And I feel like so many groups and companies do that where you don't even get to celebrate or reflect of what you just accomplished or what you did as a team. So making sure that you are taking time to process and to make sure like what worked, what didn't, and that's okay too. And there's no pointing fingers or anything, and making sure that, you're writing down the lessons and what we can do better for moving forward. So I would say digital was a big learning curve for us this year.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that because I think, working on the influencer side and the social side, we always love brand partners that are willing to try out of the box concepts or something new to keep something exciting. But I think sometimes you'll have that hesitancy in wanting to try something and fail. And I think it's interesting that we kind of lose sight of the fact that no one's going to have a perfect campaign. 100% of the time, there are going to be challenges and things that come up that we don't expect. But you're right. And kind of how do we utilize those learnings moving forward is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned brand ambassadors, and I know that's kind of a huge function of the brand and having that celebrity talent connection. And then in our conversations, you're also talking about how, this growing NIL, NCAA athlete utilization has kind of become very important for brands. Was that something that was always kind of in the back of your mind as you were developing strategy, or have you guys kind of adapted and have kind of put that on the forefront of what you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So when I first joined on, we made sure that we understood our influencer strategy and looking at what the company had already, which I mentioned our investors quite a bit were celebrities like A-Rod, we had Baron Davis, we signed on Olivia Culpo and Christian McCaffrey, and ways that we can leverage them. Now, it could get really tricky, obviously, from a celebrity status of what they're able to do and, what their agent allows them to do. So that's always tricky at times. But the one thing that we realized when we call it like the pyramid of influence. And so at the top was our celebrities or influencers. We had quite a bit of good bit of, I would say, macro influencers. So, those who have a really large audience. And then what we realized that we were missing is just the brand fans, the brand ambassador side that could really, they're highly engaged. They love the brand. They want to work with the brand. And these are more your nano micro influencers for sure. So as we're scaling that out, we worked with the platform Sidekick to help us build basically a form if people wanted to apply. But at the same time, through our customer service, we were getting so many inquiries from student athletes. And I think because of the story of Super Coffee with three young brothers who started it out of their dorm, they were all college athletes. I think they felt this connection to the brand. So we're getting all these interests from these athletes, like how can we leverage it? At the same time, with NIL, that was happening July 1st when they made that announcement that you can work with student athletes. So at that point, we were launching our campaign called Add Something Positive. And I think what the strategy of it is really making sure that you're working with people that you know that are going to fit with your brand, and how are you going to activate them, right? Because the last thing you want to do is bring an athlete on and just kind of have them sit on your roster. You're going to waste time, money, and energy, and the athlete's going to not feel utilized or not going to have a great experience. So with that said, we just launched this campaign mid-June, Add Something Positive. It's all about deliver acts of positive energy. And we found this athlete that was featured in ESPN, that he was using his platform to give back to a kid that he met at his Notre Dame game and to fundraise money. His goal, I believe, was $30,000. So my boss and I saw that in an article, and this is like maybe a day or two before the announcement went live, and or the NIL opened up. And so we were like, this is the type of athlete that we want to work with. Like they're focusing on deliberate acts of positive energy. They're using their platform that associates with exactly what our message and our brand is. Let's just reach out and see. And his name is Dylan Gibbons, and he was actually driving across Florida. He just moved. He started with Florida State. And I pinged him and got a DM on him, and I was just trying to get on the phone with him just to get a sense of his personality and just hearing more what he was doing. And then my boss and I were like, okay, well, once he hits to the half point, why don't we donate the rest so he hits his goal? And then we'll just leave it at that. Like if it works out, if it doesn't, totally fine. It's more about the purpose of doing something good. And so he hit his midway point. We finished it off at hitting his 30K. And then I guess his mom called and was like, hey, this company Super Coffee just donated to hit your goal. We should look into it. And then it all connected the dots. So just getting on the phone with him, it just made sense. But yeah, I think with NIL athletes, it's, they definitely connect with a younger consumer. They're so more savvy within partnership marketing and content creation and what they're doing. And it just made sense for our brand in that sense. So that was a perfect example with Dylan, but then also from a brand ambassador standpoint, we've been trying to connect more with the younger consumer. And here was this opportunity. So how did we connect the dots? So we were able to seed them product, get them engaged with the brand. There's been some opportunities of getting some content from them as well. And then supporting them. And if they want to, see product to their teams and everything else, I mean, they're boots on the ground at these college campuses, which has been really cool. So it was just really like looking at our strategy in the beginning, where were the gaps? And then obviously opportunities like NIL, you just got to focus and move fast on that type of stuff, because when those opportunities come up, it's just, figuring out what works best and driving it with purpose.
Mm-hmm. And kind of piggybacking off of that, we're seeing on our side too, there's been this huge push in wanting to utilize female content creators, especially women of color, and really incorporating them, giving them a larger voice, making sure that they're getting the same type of opportunities as other content creators. Has that been kind of an underlying focus as well, and kind of this brand ambassador program that you're developing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, making sure that you're still rounding out your roster of what you need. And, I think more than ever, companies are over indexing this. I think going back to my point earlier is just making sure there's a purpose. I think a lot of companies just check the box and it's what they're supposed to do. And that doesn't make it right by any means. But I think that they don't know what to do, or what was the purpose of bringing these people on. And then there's some brands who've done a tremendous job within campaigns and bringing creators in that sense of women of color and just, females overall. I think the other thing has been a big topic is making sure that you're paying them, the same amount that you're paying other creators. And I know I'm part of the Women Influencer group with Jesse Grossman, and that's been a big topic, is making sure that creators, of color, females, are just making sure that they're getting paid the same amount as everybody else. So I feel like that can cross over a lot of different industries as well. I know the talk that they just hosted here, Women in Marketing, was talking about, supporting women in that sense and in that culture. But yeah, I think just making sure there's a purpose of why you're using these folks and intentionally. And I think developing the partnership and the relationship with these folks to that.
We were kind of talking about this yesterday on kind of our call, because I think we like to, chat about this as well, of how important it really is to have this thought out strategy, to really be making decisions with people, have them be longer partners, and have it be very carefully selected and not kind of that one-off like you were mentioning. I don't know if did we lose you?
I think so for a little bit. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. There's storms
no.
here in Florida right now, and the internet keeps going in and out.
Oh, no worries. I thought it was mine too. I've been dealing with fun internet issues all week as well. No, I was just mentioning that you were we had kind of had this conversation separately about, I think sometimes people realize they need to be in the space, whether it's social, whether it's just digital, or kind of just general association with brand ambassadors, and they're doing it to do it, but they're not doing it in a longer tail form where you're connecting with these people, you're really associating the brand with these people. And, like you're mentioning, if there's layers of social good and other things, really making sure that that comes out in your strategy and not just, we need someone to take a picture with product and push it out because that's what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just, I totally agree with that. And with you and I chatting about it yesterday, I think that's catching on more and more, and these creators just don't want to just do a one-time post. It's a lot of effort to get to know the brand, try their product, lean into it, onboarding, making sure that the content is aligned to what the brand wants. It just takes a lot of time. And obviously you want to test with the company that you're working with, but I think what brands and company side need to realize is that it's a lot of work and wasted time and money and energy on their side too. So just keeping in mind that I know for long-term partnerships, it seems like people are pulling back from that, but just still keeping in mind, you're still developing these relationships. These are business relationships at the end of the day. And I feel like at times brands do kind of do this like turn and burn with creators at times. And obviously if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and that's fine. But when it's just continuous, it's a very small world, and they want to, people talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were mentioning that you are part of a female organization that works with influencer talent as well. And we've kind of been talking about how it's really important for you to support other women in marketing, kind of taking a step back at the topic of the panel. I would love for you to kind of discuss, how has supporting other women in marketing, was that always kind of a focus for you? Has it been something that, working at Super Coffee, has that kind of continued? And kind of, I would love any, insight you're able to provide there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I previously, before I was at Super Coffee, I was at Under Armour. Very, obviously sports industry, very male dominated world. And I was in the run and train category, and especially with running and track and field, it was all men. I was a very young female entering into that business. And, when I looked around, it was just very hard to find other female mentors around me to help me navigate into this process. And with Under Armour in the early days, we had, quite a bit of great female leaders there, and people leave and you kind of feel lost in that journey of seeing your mentors leave. So it could be hard. So for me, I always was so thankful for those mentors in my life, and I just wanted to give back in that sense. And then as I was navigating through, entering into an industry that was mostly male dominated and ways to connect, like I would reach out to other female agents or brand leaders that, I saw even from competitors, and just be like, hey, it's great to have another female in the room. And just making sure that you're connecting together. And then, I've done some work outside the office too. I always find it very important that if you're not getting that support from an internal sense, making sure you're finding your own resources and network. So for me, in 2019, I joined this group called Renegade. And it's founded by Amy Jo Martin. And it's probably about 30 or so women that all different backgrounds. There was women who were real estate agents to executives, influencers, building their own businesses. And what I loved about that, it wasn't just, sports marketing for me. Like I could hear what's going on with somebody else, support them, kick back ideas, and they would do the same for me. It was just so refreshing in that sense. And then being from Baltimore too, it's a very small group of women there. Everybody knows everybody in the city, I feel like, and they're just amazing people. So I just, finding ways to support one another has been so key in that. With Super Coffee, it starting with 3 young males, I think their initiative is to get more females into the company. We've brought in some great leaders from, we have a CFO, Rosie, who came in from Amazon and Whole Foods, who was, leading the charge on that, came over to Super Coffee. We have Tori Hanna, who is our CMO, and she came over from Under Armour as well. So just constantly surround yourself in that grouping and keeping it in check. And I just felt like at times, if I wasn't getting that support, and this is what I tell younger females too, if you're not getting that support that you're feeling and you need that connection, you're going to have to do it on your own. And that's okay. And that's totally fine. A lot of corporate companies aren't going to do it for you. And so you got to take the initiative on your own. So, I feel like too, if you're not getting that support in your company, maybe speak up to HR. I know at Under Armour, we built these teammate resource groups. We had a Women of Will, and it was just a great way to get women from all different departments, and to come together and support. So just really finding ways to dig in that and find it and find that support.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I caught the tail end of the panel before us, and I think the universal topic has always been mentorship. And it seems every woman that works in the industry has found 1 or 2 women ahead of them to really help guide them on the initial steps. And you kind of brought this up at the end of your response. If you're starting out, for people that may be tuning in that maybe, just starting out in the industry, do you have any advice? Is it joining a female organization like Renegade or something to help kind of give you guidance? Is it something where you think it's best to reach out on LinkedIn and find people that are in similar positions? Or what do you think is kind of the best route to kind of get that initial potential mentorship?
Yeah. If they're just starting out, I think it's doing all those things. There's going to be times you're going to reach out on LinkedIn to find a mentor, and they may not respond. And that's fine too. People are busy and people only have a certain capacity. So don't take it personally. I think in my early years, I would take it so personally if I didn't get an email back or a response back, oh, I'm not good enough because they don't want to mentor me. And that's not the case. I think one of the points in the previous conversation was you just don't know what people are going through at home. You don't know what they're going through at work. So do not take it personally. But I also think it's important just to it's all word of mouth too. Ask your friends, ask see what your mentors, or if you don't have a mentor yet and you see what women you inspire to be, what are they doing? What are they posting about? What are they sharing about? But yeah, I think it's important to look at those groups or whatever it is. And also too, from your industry or your department, whatever it may be, where your interests are, there's so many groups out there. And more than ever, I remember my early days of social, you kind of met these online friends, and that's the way you connected with other women. I remember workout groups and found a group, and then it was Tone It Up, and I found friends in Baltimore, but it's so much easier now more than ever. So I think it's just depending what your interest is, what you want to get out of it. You have so many options out there, and you could just kind of dig into it and see what fits best and do a little bit of everything, and then kind of, if one group worked and one didn't, then you kind of know where you want to go next.
Mm-hmm. And how has the pandemic kind of affected? Obviously, we were used to doing a lot of these, post-work get-togethers, or you were doing, panels during the week or what have you. How has the pandemic kind of affected any of those types of organizations that you're involved in?
It's just like Brand Innovators, right? We are just all doing digitally, and Slack has been a really great resource too, just connecting with people, conversations, I think also, as well as different media type ways. I think podcasting has been really interesting in some of the groups too, where they'll talk about maybe for 15, 20 minutes, here's the hot topics, check it out, read about it, listen to about it. And then they would repost that through Slack. And then that conversation kind of spins off from each other. And at the same time, it's a great way to introduce yourself, to connect, whatever it may be. So I feel like through the pandemic, we've all pivoted, but it's just all virtually. It's more virtual things. I feel like in the spring even this year, things were opening back up slowly and surely, but then, Omicron came. So we're kind of back and sheltered, but I do feel like things with events are slowly opening up again, which is great. And then even just, if you are feeling lonely, because I'm such a people person, I need that human interaction, and screen time doesn't just check the box for me for that. I think finding another person or a friend who, maybe you guys are both in the similar position, but maybe at different companies, like go grab coffee with somebody. It doesn't need to be a big event, but just to have that interaction with somebody, I think is so, we kind of get stuck in our zones at home and locked into the screen, where I think it's so healthy to get out and to engage with people in person. And even if it's just, 2 or 3 people, it doesn't need to be a massive event or group. And I know that people are trying to be cautious on that.
Yeah, it's, I feel like every 5 minutes you're like, okay, everything's fine. We can go out and meet people again. And then they're like, just kidding, everyone back home, because we did the same thing. We had one office get together, I think when everyone was vaccinated and things seemed kind of mild. And then obviously with kind of the developments as of late, I'm in LA. So it's kind of a hotbed at the moment. We're all kind of back to doing virtual things, but I think you're right. We did, virtual wine tastings or different things where you could still, engage outside of work and have some of that time and take a little bit of a break. Cause I think this was also brought up on the panel too, a little bit of taking a break from work. I think, cause we're at a place right now where it feels like you're working, 20 hours a day. And having some of that me time has been really important as well.
It's so funny you bring this up, Courtney, because the group of women I'm with down here on this trip, we were just talking about that employees don't know how to shut it off. And a lot of times your boss, your manager is like, take the time, like shut it down. Like you have permission. So why aren't you doing it? There's this pressure on ourselves that we need to be doing more. And I think it's harder than ever that you can't separate it, where we would go to an office, we would drive home, whatever the commute may be. And then like home was home, work was work for the most part. But now it's all combined together. And so, yeah, it's really hard to separate that. But I think as a person, you have to kind of take a time out of like, do you feel aligned with yourself? How are you feeling physically and mentally? And then that check-in, like, will tell you if you need to take the time and maybe you need to go on a staycation at a hotel down the street just to get away from home for a little bit, or if you could take a trip somewhere just with a different change of scenery, whatever it may be. But I think more than ever, people just want you to take care of yourselves right now. And that's like another thing is just so many people are leaving their jobs right now. They feel so burnt out. And, I think a lot of times it is companies are trying to do things to make it better, but it's like, is it the right things? Is it the most intentional things for your employees? So I feel like that could be a whole other discussion at another time, but yeah, it's a real thing that people are going through right now. But I just think if you just make the time to get out of the house, separate it, put your computer somewhere else, put your phone off, like you got to do those things more than ever now.
Mm-hmm. We're almost at time, but I usually like to end with a few kind of fun questions before we kind of jump into questions from the audience. First off, do you have a favorite flavor of super coffee? I tried pumpkin during this last holiday break, and that was one of my favorites. Do you have a favorite flavor?
I have a couple. So normally I'm a hot coffee girl in the morning. Like it's something just very ceremonial of like hot coffee in the morning, quiet. So I usually do our grounds in the morning. And if I need a little pick me up in the afternoon, it's usually our coconut mocha, which is plant-based. And then we had a blueberry latte this year in the spring. It's coming back and it was so good. It was so delicious. It tasted like a blueberry muffin basically. And that was plant-based too. So those two are like my go-tos.
Nice. I'm always a big fan of the holiday. So I was leaning into the pumpkin and then you had some of the Christmas flavors. So those were my ones to look forward to. And then kind of last, we typically end on this question. Is there something that you're looking forward to? I know obviously from a personal standpoint, it's always shifting with the pandemic, but is there something you're looking forward to both from a personal and a professional standpoint for the rest of the year?
Yeah. So I feel like 22 is kind of hit pretty hard, not hard, like heavy wise, but just a lot of changes and transitions. I feel like a lot of people are going through that right now. For me personally, I think just kind of getting back into travel again, it really inspires me to have new ideas, to refreshing thinking and to meet new people is always key. So that for me, for a personal note, like I would love to get back to travel again. And then, yeah, I'm making some new moves on the job front too. And I'm excited to be joining a group of women in the next month or so and really helping on this conversation of employee retention and supporting employees, but also from female entrepreneurship, empowerment, ways that we can make them better and think about their self-branding. So I'm excited that there's some changes and shifts happening for me personally and career-wise, and excited to see that come to life in the next few weeks.
Yeah, travel has been a big thing for me too. I've been really itching to get back into travel. I think the hard part is that it seems like there'd be like, I snuck in one trip at the end of last year, I think before Omicron became a huge deal. But every time I think about planning, another variant comes out and I'm like, oh God, I just, but that's okay because there's a lot, I wasn't doing as many, road trips or domestic travel. And I think there's other ways to, get out and give yourself a little bit of a break that we may not have thought about before. And seeing, I'm in LA, you could drive up to the mountain, it's not a long drive to the mountains or things like that. So there are definitely options, but would love for it to start to ease up a little bit.
I think that's a way they get forced us to try new things in a whole different capacity, and like to drive the local trips, get in your car, go to the mountains, go to somewhere that is a little bit more spacious. I know a lot of us who are in cities, like we just wanted to get outside and get fresh air and have space and everything, as we've been stuck home in our apartments or condos, whatever it may be. I have a friend who, we joke around time. I think Jen, she's probably watching this right now, but we always are trying to send some new fun places that are like a little bit secluded, so you feel safe if it's a tiny home or whatever it may be, like just these little gems that are more local that you would never do ever. But you're just making it happen now because you're just to a point where you're like, I need to get out. I need something, which isn't bad either, because you're just trying new things in a whole different capacity, but it's definitely not a flight across the country and, going to different places.
Exactly. You have agreement from the audience.
Yes.
Before we dive into another question, this was something you and I had chatted a little bit about, taking a step back and looking at the brand. I think for growing brands, sometimes people will want to focus on that awareness and kind of increasing the brand's perception within the space. But then there's also always that focus with it's a catch-22. You need to drive sales, but you also need people to recognize the brand. How do you go about balancing kind of both aspects of that?
It's so key, right? Because at the end of the day, the company needs to make money, right? I think it's just really understanding, what the company needs to prioritize. I would say brand awareness is key. And when you're driving brand awareness and brand resonance with the consumer, that's going to eventually lead to revenue. And I think this is the hard part that, a lot of executive teams go through, because they want to see ROI right away, right? Like if they're not seeing $1 happen right away, especially in marketing and influencers, it's really hard to track, especially for a company like Super Coffee. It's hard because our products are literally in every grocery store now, and which is amazing. It's great. And our .com business is doing great as well. But if somebody heard us on a podcast or saw it from an influencer, they're out grocery shopping, that's where they're purchasing that product and grabbing it and go, versus just buying a 12-pack online and shipping and now there's shipping delays. Like you rather just have it in the hands, So I think for my recommendation is, making sure that you're not just making it feel like a very salesy type of brand, where it feels very transactional and just pushing codes and links constantly, because the consumer is going to get tired of it and they're just going to start ignoring you. I think you have to be very thoughtful in the way that when you're working with influencers and building up your brand strategy and driving brand awareness and ways to be part of that consumer journey, right? By the time they wake up, they get on their phone, what are they looking at? Is it Spotify for a podcast, or they're looking on Instagram, making sure that you're part of that consumer journey. And then when they're coming off their phones or going to the gym or getting online, like what does that look like? So just making sure that you look at the consumer and obviously who is your demographic, what's important to them in that journey, and making sure you're part of those touch points every way through. And then obviously there's different ways to measure that. If it's a brand uplift or the promoter score or whatever it may be, like just seeing those results come through. And it takes time. I know for us, when we did our national campaign in June, we're just seeing those results. So that's almost 6 months or so later. It just takes time. So, I think there just needs to be this healthy balance that it's not, you want to make sure you're connecting the dots for sales, but also you want to make sure that you're doing an authentic way that gives the consumer to lean in and to care and why to purchase in that sense, because that's going to last longer.
Mm-hmm. Um, I think also you had kind of mentioned this at the beginning. Under Armour, obviously, within kind of the sports arena, tends to be very male focused to a degree. So do, some beverage brands, and a lot of the fitness focused brands can kind of have this male focus within both the internal teams and some of the marketing pushes. You had mentioned that some of the owners are trying to make sure that they have more females within the brand itself. Do you feel like there's really been a push to kind of include that in your marketing? Have you guys also been doing internal things to make sure that you have more widely represented staff?
Yeah, I think the team has been focused on bringing from a female leadership. Like I said, I think when we had to bring in a CFO, it was really important to make sure she was a female in that mix. And that's exactly what they did. Mm-hmm. And we're still growing. The brand is still small, in that sense. And you need to make sure you have a balance of executives versus the people who are middle management in that sense. And then from a marketing sense, I mean, it's something we look at every day. It's so important. Our CMO, Tori Hanna, I mean, she is one of the biggest advocates for that, and just making sure that we are making sure that it's not just talking to men because we, have 3 males that started the company, but how do we evolve that? And that was a big thing. When we looked at our roster of people that are macro influencers, we saw some gaps and we were like, we need to fix this immediately. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was anything on purpose. I think that there's friends of the brand that just love the brand, that knew the brothers. They're all, college sport buddies. And it just, when you're growing, you're like, anybody who wants to support the brand, come on in, and I think when you get to a certain point, you constantly have to look at that roster of folks that you're working with and making sure that you're balancing out. And like I said, it's not to check a box. It has to be intentional. You have to make sure you have an activation plan that you're really thinking through, because if not, that person's going to feel in the other end, and it's not going to be a great experience, and they're not going to really promote the brand in the way that you want to. So I think that's really key to make sure you're doing those things.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes you're right. Brands can kind of turn on autopilot and they want to make sure they're, 50% are male, 50% are female, just make sure that you have equal representation, and it's not really thought out in the degree. They're just like, we don't want any PR flack on the back end from anything that we're doing. So we want everything to be split evenly, as opposed to, I think it's great to see small brands that really take that into consideration, where they're doing thoughtful selection and making sure that there's a balance, but the balance is there for a reason, or the people that you're working with are definitely there for a reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, it just needs to be intentional in the right capacity for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think we're almost at time. Let's see if there are any other questions. I think kind of going back to kind of the work that you're doing outside, you had kind of talked about how you're making moves and you're doing some different things the rest of the year. Do you think that this will always be something where you'll want to do some type of mentorship program in the future? Is it always something that's really important when you carry that from job to job? I think for those of us that have been very lucky to have really great mentors, I think for me personally, I've always wanted to, help younger members of our team kind of come up, because I think you're right, that's really important and can kind of set the goal when you're just starting out in the career. But is it going to be something that you're going to want to focus on when you move around?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a way kind of giving back, but also in a sense, like that's how we all get better as women. That's how our organizations get better. And I think it's just so important to make time. Like, you have to prioritize it. I feel like a lot of times we let the work just sneak in and we push, this call with this person or this meetup with that person. And, oh, I won't attend this happy hour event with these women because I got to do work. And it's like, at the end of the day, this is what's going to make you better. This is how we're going to make all of us women better, to just work together, collaborate, and just kind of be in an alliance in that sense to help each other out. But you got to carve the time. You need to prioritize it, is my biggest takeaway. So any move I do, it's something that I try to continuously keep in touch. And then there's going to be moments where like you're changing jobs and life happens and you're like, I just don't have bandwidth for this right now. And I don't know about anybody else, when you go to these social functions, like I'm so much more tired at the end of the day in person versus like being on screen. And then you just like need to recoup. So just being like, in the presence, like if you're there, put your phone away, like be fully there, have the conversations. You took the time to go there, just make it happen. Or if you're on the phone, like don't be on your computer searching and typing and emailing and all that stuff, or texting. Just making sure that you're fully present with that person, that group, whatever it be, and really prioritize that. I think that's just like, as you're growing your career, like that's just one of the things that you have to do.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I think this week has been crazy for a lot of us because we lost Monday, and I kind of felt the same way. I'm like, oh God, I really need to like stop prioritizing. Some things need to shift. I need to be helping out some more members of my team and not spending so much time focusing on emails and things. So I think that's really a great point to take away.
Yeah, awesome.
I believe we're at time now. Perfect. Okay, well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining the panel today. I really appreciate it. Really great insights. Love the brand and very excited to see what you are going to be continuing to do in the next couple of years.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Great meeting you, Courtney. Thank you so much to Brand Innovators for having us today. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Yet another incredible conversation. Jamie, it was really great hearing everything you had to say too. Like I said, I'm taking notes on all of these conversations, but when you ended, I thought it was just such a perfect ending about how giving back and networking and mentoring, even if you sometimes have to kind of push yourself out the door these days to do that kind of stuff, it's how we all get better as women. So amen to that. And thank you both again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, ladies. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Okay, so we are moving right along. Man, I'm going to try to slow this down because I just don't want the day to end. Our next session is really special. Lauren Ruotolo is a disability advocate and author, and unfortunately, she couldn't make it here with us today live. So the next session is going to be a pre-recorded session with her. But I have to say, I had the luck to see it live a couple of months ago at the Brand Innovators DEI Summit. And I can't recommend it enough. It's really powerful and really special. And I think you're all going to really, really enjoy it. So stick around. That's coming up in just a moment.
Hi, Lauren. It's so nice to finally meet you face to face.
So nice to meet you face to face. I'm so excited when we got to chat yesterday.
Yeah, and thanks for everyone who is on the line. This is going to be a really really interesting and candid conversation that we'll have, and we'll chat for about 25 minutes and then go into a Q&A. Hopefully I'm technically savvy enough to figure that out, but just in case I'm not, or it's not an inquisitive crowd, I have like a cajillion questions, so we're good. Yeah, I learned when I recently did a an event like this that it's best for any of our viewers who might be visually impaired to describe myself before I begin speaking. And Lauren, if I could ask the same of you. So my name is Stephanie Bone, and I work at a company called VidMob. We're a creative technology company, and really thrilled to be here. I have a background from Brand Innovators. It's blue. At the top it says diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have brown hair. I'm a white woman, and I have a gray shirt on with a happy face because that's how I feel, and a gray sweater. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I am Lauren Ruotolo. I am the creative head of creative video creative for Johnson & Johnson. I have red hair. I am sitting in a hospital bed right now, which is not normal, but I am sitting right here. I have red hair, like I said, blue eyes, and I am wearing a black and white hoodie today.
I love it. We're very in sync
hoodie,
with our,
I should call it.
zip up hoodie. We're very in sync with our colors today.
Yes.
So let me do a little bit of bragging on your behalf, Lauren, before we get going. Lauren, for those of you who you don't follow yet, you should, but she is the author of a book called Unstoppable in Stilettos. She's an innovative marketing leader. As she mentioned, she's at J&J right now. She's been there for about 7 years. currently holding the role of Director of Creative Production and Partnerships. She's got a really cool career, having spent, I'm guessing, about a decade, if I add up all the years on LinkedIn, in entertainment, which
More than that. That makes me really old. More than that.
So she's been at the Jim Henson Company and TV Guide and Hearst, and then had a really interesting stint as the VP of Marketing and Publicity at a company called Dance On, and then is now at J&J. So she keeps very busy by day, but she's also moonlighting as an author and a TV and film producer and an inspirational speaker, and an activist and advocate for disabled people. And so it's just with great pleasure that we're here with Lauren today, and we're going to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's funny, before we get started, Lauren and I had a chance to meet and have a proper conversation before, which is always nice before someone is interviewed. But I stalked her. I got her cell phone last night. I texted her and we had a little text chat. We realized we actually have quite a bit in common, in addition to like dozens of people, mutual connections on LinkedIn. We both spent about a decade in the entertainment industry. Amazingly, we grew up about 10 minutes from each other. I currently live in LA for the last 20 years, and Lauren is in New York, but we realized we are we're about the same age, and we grew up very close to each other, which is wild. And we share an obsession with Bagel Boss Bagels in Nassau County on Long Island. We both also understand what it means to live with a rare disease. Lauren lives this personally with a personal disability, which we'll talk about, McCune-Albright syndrome. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Myself, I have a 7-year-old daughter who has a rare disease called Rett syndrome. And so we, and as a parent, all of her struggles feel like my own struggle. So certainly understand a lot of the experiences of, having health scares, of course, but also feeling underrepresented for me on my daughter's behalf. But, you, Lauren, you have this lived experience. And it's so powerful to be able to talk about this with an audience, presumably, of people who don't have that same experience, and who want to understand how that can be applied to making the world and the corporate America and our businesses and our marketing fairer and more representative and accurate and respectful. So that's what we'll get into today. So the first thing I wanted to ask, we covered sort of your biography, but if there's anything that you wanted to talk about, like your career path, would be really interesting just to get to know you a bit. How did you think about your career trajectory? And at J&J, what are some of the things that you do day to day?
So my career trajectory really started when I was a teenager. I was very, what they would say, like precocious when it came to wanting to work. And I always knew that I wanted to be in entertainment and some kind of music or video or content, but I didn't really know what it was at that age. I just knew that I wanted to not be on stage, but to be backstage and to really put it all together. And so I did. I was the first ever intern at the age of 16 at a local radio station called WDRE. You may remember it, Stephanie. It was like a local New York, Long Island station. Yeah. And then I went to Hofstra University and worked for Z100. And if anybody knows where Hofstra is, it's in Long Island, and Z100 at that point was in New Jersey. And so I would drive 3 days a week, about an hour and a half each way, to be an intern, not for free. Back then, everybody was a free intern. I know that times have changed today, but it was. And I just always knew that I wanted to create and just be part of some kind of entertainment. Like I said before, I didn't really know what that was. At first, I thought that maybe that was radio. But then that really spurred into more of PR and marketing and video. And I spent at TV Guide, really gave me the opportunity to see not only the behind the scenes of how television shows were made, but how the industry really worked. And I got to do, I'm a very big believer in trying and innovating and being the first at things. I am not scared of trying new things by any means. Just because it's true and tried doesn't mean that you need to use that all the time. Sometimes you need to think outside of the box and bring new things. And so we were really able to do that, put the first ever CD on the cover of a magazine, was able to sell 1 million copies in that week. And, you know, it really was able to take what I learned at TV Guide and apply that then to Hearst Magazines, which was a much larger company, a much larger publishing company that had some of, you know, and still has some of the largest magazines and brands in the world, such as Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, Elle, Good Housekeeping, Esquire. They've acquired a lot more brands since then. But at that point, I was the director of promotions and really got to think about how do you apply television and entertainment into the magazines and vice versa. You know, because we were so highly fashion magazines and beauty, but really how do you take those brands and integrate them on TV and vice versa? And so we were able to do that, worked on Project Runway, created shows for Marie Claire and for Joanna Coles, and did a lot of stuff for Good Housekeeping. And, you know, I really got an incredible opportunity to really do a lot of charitable give back at 17 magazine. You know, it was so wonderful to work with children and with, not children, they were teens, I should say, not children. But really, I learned so much from the editor-in-chief and Choquette, and really, you know, how do you combine the power of what's happening and how to apply it. At that point, it was just the beginning of social media. And how do you apply? We did this huge campaign for bullying, and it kind of like changed my trajectory of how I thought about things, and how taking what's happening in the media and in people's lives and creating programs, helpful programs around that. And I just love the idea of helping teens, because when you can change a teenager's mind or showcase to them that you're there, it really changes their trajectory for life. And so, you know, when you know, now at Johnson & Johnson, which is what we do all the time. And so it's in our credo, it's in, you know, every single employee is invested in helping people. And so that's a lot of what I do. And we tell these beautiful stories of change makers and health change makers really trying to change that trajectory for health and for medicine today. So that's kind of where I am, besides my side hustles.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I'd love to dig into is spinning off of a conversation that was had in the last session. Shireen Miller-Russell from Discovery was asked for her definition of diversity. DE&I is a very fortunately trending topic, and it's very popular to talk about today. But I think lots of people come at it with their own kind of interpretations of what it is. And I love the way she thinks about it. And she said, diversity is like being invited to the party. Mm-hmm. Inclusion and accessibility is like being asked to dance. I recently interviewed another woman for a diversity and equity and inclusion event. Her name is Keely Ketwells. She's disabled. She's fantastic. For those of you who don't, she runs a company called C Talent. And she thinks about it in terms of, you know, diversity is having a seat at the table, but accessibility is being able to get through the door to the table. And, you know, if we don't think about accessibility in those ways, then you may have hired all the right people, but if they can't get to the table to you know, weigh in, it's not really maximizing the value of diversity. And so I'd love to know from your point of view, Lauren, how do you think about DE&I? How would you define diversity, equity, and inclusion or accessibility?
You know, I think it's really interesting because it is such a hot topic today, and it's a trending topic. But I would say that it's a trending topic, not for all. And especially when it comes to the disabled community, what I say is, similar to like what Kat was saying, is that we are invisible. And so while DE&I wants to include everybody, they still don't. And I think that it's really important that when you really dig down and think about that, we need to not only allow people through the door, but create that door for them and visualize that door for them so they can be invited to that party and they can put on those dancing shoes or put on whatever they want to wear to the party, but give them access to it, or think about the access that you're going to provide. And that is where, change makers like myself, or change makers like Kat, or change makers like the Valuable 500 are really here to make that impact, because DE&I, while people are so impressed by it today, it is still closed off to a lot of people. And I would say that it is closed off and we have not entered the room yet. And when I say we, I mean the disabled community. And I think that it's time for that to change. So we need to not only visualize the door that it will be open to people, but we need to also go into those communities and tell people that they can enter that door to be at the board table, to be at the party, because we are told so many times the word no. We live by the word no, and it's really more of a not no, you can't do that because we don't want you. We want to keep you safe. So no is like a safety word ultimately. And I'm sure, as you know, being a mom of a girl with a rare disease, it is safe. It's safer to keep her inside. It's safer to keep her with you at all times. And that's what you want to do because it's love and you just want to keep them safe. But when it comes to us living in the real world, whether you walk with crutches, or in a wheelchair with a walker, which is honestly just a mode of transportation, or you have a rare disease, we need to begin taking the conversations and including this community outside of the doctor's office. And that's where it's really held. And, I call us the invisible community. And how do you make the invisible invincible? You need to give them the opportunity. You need to showcase that you care about them and that you see them. And I think that that's what's so important. I think that when we think about D&I, we need to start seeing people that, to be honest, have a different mode of transportation, and don't be afraid of it, and start including them, and it could be as big or as it's small, but just the fact, if you think about the word inclusion, if you're not including everybody, then you can't call yourself an inclusive company just because you're following what the media says. And I think that that's what we do, or just by who has the loudest voice. If we really are going to be inclusive, whether it be at the party or in the boardroom, we need to think about every kind of person that is a little bit different.
I couldn't agree more. And I think in order for us to make the invisible feel invincible, companies have to do a better job of I'll just focus on companies because this is a business conversation, but I think it extends everywhere. We have to anticipate what the accommodation needs may be, and just do it even before there is a person who needs that accommodation. And it could be as simple as a type of a door handle. It could be as simple as, where, the height at which certain fixtures are set, or, making sure that the elevator is always working, or that there is a ramp. I mean, anticipating those things before someone arrives will, I think, get ahead of a person who needs those accommodations feeling like they're a burden. And that sort of eats away at that sense of invincibility. Would you agree with that? And if so,
I would.
what are some of the things that you, I guess, personally have experienced that could have been better handled?
Well, I think that even before you think about, so like if you have a new building or you're building something or even an existing building, what happens is, and this is kind of sad, is they say, okay, is the building ADA compliant? And the building may very well be ADA compliant, but the buck stops there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think about the actual person that would use that ramp, that would open that door, that is going to be in the elevator, that needs to go to the cafeteria. They do it because they won't get their permits, or they do it because they want to say that they are an ADA compliant building. Well, buildings are not people. And so because we're not brick and mortar and all of these things, we are actual people with feelings, with thoughts, with, just the same brain power as everybody else. We need to think about to meet people where they are first. I want people to say, okay, now I have that building and I have that accessible door. Now, how do I get those people inside that building? Because it's not just good enough to have a door where somebody could just push a button and it opens, because then what happens? Everybody uses that door, but it wasn't made for everybody, right? And so you have to meet them where they are, whether they be in school, whether they be in various different community outreaches. The same how when really DNA started with, the Black and Latin communities and then the LGBTQI communities, is you went out and you sought out those people and you did campaigns, especially hiring campaigns for that. No one is currently doing outreaches for this community. If somebody happens to apply and they are the right candidate, then great. But no one is actively seeking it out, which is really sad. And therefore, you can't really say that you're an inclusive company just because you have, an ADA compliant bathroom or a lunch table or, whatever it may be. I want to see people like me on the walls.
Yeah, like, if there are, I'm sure many people on this call have open positions and they're trying to fill them. And they, I think there may be some eye-opening that we could do if you could share some advice on a good way to reach out to the disabled community, since that's specifically what we're talking about in this conversation, to make those opportunities be known and available. How can this group of people be more proactive about that?
I think that, similar, there's such discrimination in the workplace, and because there is, I think that you need to go out and you need to seek. So you need to go to those colleges, just like you would do any place else, but it needs to be part of your plan. So you need to say, okay, you are, a lot of people during the pandemic and with Black Lives Matter, they made statements and they said, we're going to hire 10% more. We're going to hire 15% more, whatever it may be. They need to make those same statements within this community as well. And to say, yes, we are going to bring you to the table. We are going to seek you out. So whether it be, the government now, under Biden has created, disability in the workplace, all about equal access. There are so many groups, they could easily go to the ADA, right? And even though the ADA says that it prohibits employers from discriminating against employees or applicants, the problem is that they don't think about it. It's not top of mind. And so if it's not going to be top of mind, you're never really going to do that. So I would say is to go to your college campuses, go to disability schools. There is in almost in every single district or in every single, large city, that there are schools that accommodate the disabled. There are schools and there are places where you can seek this community out. We are the highest unemployed community. I think it's something like 17% of people who are disabled are unemployed. Or actually they are employed. So if you think about that, that's a huge statistic. But the idea that when you hire a person that is disabled, they will value that more than any other employee, because what they will say is, you saw me, you heard me, now you're employing me. And that is such a huge change in their life, and they will always respect that. They will always want to give you the productivity that they know that you deserve, because you believed in them. And so there are statistics that productivity is actually higher from a disabled person than a non-disabled person. And it is because the belief in who you are, and that you actually said yes to them versus no.
So I think this is a really interesting time to pivot and talk about the sense of sort of vulnerability, owning your story, and living out loud and proud. And I think you deserve an immense amount of credit. I look at all the things that the content that you create, and the platform that you've built on LinkedIn, which I think could be a really scary place for some people who have very personal challenges, whether they be disabilities or other things in life, to be honest about. And so what I often see is that, I'm guilty of it myself. I would show up at the office with my game face on and pretend that everything's perfect. I'm like everyone else. And, I don't have a disabled daughter, and all the, these things that just could bring some, embarrassment, or feel like they're going to be, pitied, or there's a stigma. And so they don't talk about it. And
Right.
So there's so much actually invisible diversity that we don't even know about, because people aren't sharing their stories. There's a woman that I've worked with in the past, for 6+ months we worked together, and there were I could tell there were some boundaries that she was setting in her life, and I wanted to be respectful. And it took her half a year to tell me she had MS. And I was so honored and grateful for knowing that. And then we could sort of develop a plan so that she felt that she was completely set up for success. But it was sad to me that I looked at it as a failing of mine, that I didn't create a safe enough space for her to be able to be open about that and proud about it. So that kind of thing inspires me to talk at least about my personal journeys, and I hope others do the same. I'd love to know, this is a long-winded way of asking, how has it been for you to sort of put yourself out there, and talk about the stuff that bleeds out of out of your sort of corporate persona? And what advice do you have for people to sort of share the things, their differences that actually are of great value to companies?
Sure. So I think it's twofold. So number one, I wasn't always, wanting to put myself out there. I was just Lauren, and I was happy just being Lauren, and being very confident and like pushy. And, I'd always be that person, and never said, I am Lauren, a person that walks with crutches, that lives with a rare disease. And it took me a really long time to get there, because you know what? I shied away from people that weren't like me, that looked like me, because I was scared that what could happen to that, what happens to me could be worse, and I could be them. And I think that happens with a lot of people. And I think that people are scared of it. And I was scared of myself. And it took me a really long time to say, you know what? I'm no longer scared of myself. And I was given this pushy voice and this mindset to say, you know what? I am good enough, and I am not going to be invisible anymore. Even though the world saw me as Lauren, 4'0", walks with crutches, wears heels, I just saw myself as Lauren. I did not see myself as being disabled. And that's what I brought to the table. And when people may ask me about it, I was kind of like, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't know what you're talking about. Now I have a different mindset. And ever since I wrote my book, because I'm proud of it, I am proud to use my voice. And so, for example, at Johnson & Johnson, when I first got there, I started looking for people like me and I didn't see anybody. And I said, okay, I'm at a healthcare company. Why don't I see people like me? Now, we're a very, very large company, so I'm not saying that there are not, because there plenty are, but within where I worked, right? I never saw. But I didn't speak up about it. Then all of a sudden, I just said, I need to, if I want to be seen and I want others to show that people like me can be seen in a workplace, and if you can't be seen at a healthcare company, the largest and most diverse healthcare company, where could you be seen, or how could you really bring your voice to the table? So I said to employee communications, or I said to HR, I want to see more people like me in the workplace. How can I help you establish that? You know, and like one of the first places was, well, we're doing an employee shoot, or we're doing an employee video. Would you be in it? You know, and so there's these little steps that you could take. And then what happens is people then start to see you, and they start to see you not only for your disability, which will always shine through, because it is, when you're physically disabled, it's the first thing that people say.
Mm-hmm.
But now that they say, you know what? Oh, I know. So if Lauren can be up on the wall or in a video or do a presentation like this, I know somebody that is also disabled. Maybe they would like to work there, or maybe, you know, I never thought of them in that way. And I think it just really helps open the eyes. And it wasn't like that. And I think that it's really time for people like me and others to be loud. And for you, Stephanie, as a mom, you know, you want to protect and hold your child, but you also have to give them those wings in order for them to be independent enough and to say, yes, I do have a rare disease, but I'm unstoppable, and I could be the next CEO, right? Or I could be the next SVP. I could do whatever I want to do, because no matter what, I have a brain to do it. You know, it doesn't matter if you don't have a set of legs, or you don't have arms, or you don't, whatever it may be, or your legs don't work, or your insides don't work perfectly. You really don't need all of that. You need your voice and you need a brain to get there. And those are the two things that most people do have, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have those things, speak up for yourself, speak up for others. And it's really time for people to not be afraid of it, and to speak up and to say, I work here. I am proud to work here. I want to show off who I am, and I want to show off everything about me, because then once you remove that barrier from yourself, others will kind of forget that you have a disability, and they'll just see you for Lauren. And for me, it was so important that I share who I am, because I was afraid once. And if I was afraid and I can do this now, so can other people. And especially children or teenagers or moms like yourself. If you see people like me grown up and successful and, you know, living in my, you know, in a world that I created for myself, then you know that your child can do that, or you know that your neighbor can do that, or whatever it may be. And, you know, it's this like you said, like you have this happy face on your shirt, this smiling face, and you want to feel happy every day. Well, I feel happy every day, and now I'm proud of who I am. And I want to show the world what it's like, because if they see what it's like, they won't be afraid of it. And even if they are, I'll show them that it's okay. And if anybody should be afraid, it's me. It's not them.
I think that is so beautiful. And I think this talk of being afraid, it triggers another question for me, which is the fear that, to your point about they shouldn't be afraid, if anything, it should be you. And it's an amazing thing that you're not, and you've come past that. When we think about the fears that other people would have, oftentimes, certainly in a professional setting, people are afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. There are words and certainly I know the LGBTQ plus community feels this deeply, pronouns and getting it right. And there's a lot of fear around saying the wrong pronoun or saying the wrong adjective or word. How can we, people who are connected to the disabled community, help people who aren't feel less afraid so that we can just all relax a little? And I think that will probably spur more opportunities and more seats at the table. What do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely do. And I call this the 5-minute rule. Give people 5 minutes, talk to them like you would talk to anybody else. Don't be afraid to walk up to them. Actually, when people walk up to me and they may ask me what's wrong, I am so thrilled to tell them about myself and my accomplishments or what I can and can't do, because it makes it real. And then they can connect with me and they know a little bit more and they're not afraid anymore. Because now all of a sudden I'm Lauren with this voice and this brain again, and we're having a real conversation versus you walking past me. And ultimately what I call it is being the producers of my life. You walk past me and you, all of a sudden, you may have sadness. You may have created this world that I live in. And once you meet somebody and you give them 5 minutes and you learn just a little bit more about them, you say, oh, wow, she, you know what? No matter what has happened to her, she's great. She's good, and then you walk and then you won't be afraid. I hate when people don't want to ask me. I have had friends that have never asked me what's wrong and they just go with it. And I will actively now just say, do you want to know why I walk with crutches? Has it ever come to your head? And they're like, yeah, when I first met you, but then it kind of went away. So I never thought to ask. And I will say, did you never think to ask because you were afraid? They will say, yes, because I don't know what to say. And I love you, or I, have grown such a fondness of whatever they say. But what if I said it wrong? And what if you were offended? I'm more offended when you don't say something and less offended when you ask. Because I know that you're curious and I know that you want to be educated. And when people want to be educated, they're learning and then they can educate somebody else. And then it becomes this like water cooler conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And say, I met this wonderful woman. I met this wonderful man. I met this inspiring child. And then it kind of makes it okay. And if I don't like something, I will tell you, and then you'll know for the next time. But don't just, people assume today. They assume what life is like. They assume that we can't. And when you turn can't on, upside down and you turn the word no, I'm on all the time. I am doing and creating, and I want to be present there. And once people stop being afraid, it really does go away. Your disability goes away from their lives because it doesn't define you. It shows who you are initially, but it doesn't define who you are as a human.
I think that's beautiful. And for everyone on the call, oftentimes in these types of conversations, audiences are left with, but what can I do? How can I help? And I think Lauren's given us some really, really practical and easy things that we can do to help move this change forward. Number one, anticipating needs before there needs to be accommodations, and not just thinking about what the building looks like, but actively also looking at recruiting opportunities and reaching out to proactively reaching out to colleges and universities and finding people who don't have easy access to the opportunities, but that are qualified, and giving them a chance. And also, being vulnerable yourself and letting yourself sort of say the wrong thing, but own it. It's okay. And it's also okay to say, I don't know the right thing to say. I don't want to offend you. Is it okay if I use this word? And that really disarms the conversation. And I think, Lauren, you said it beautifully. If someone says something you don't like, you're very capable of telling them, and then they'll know for next time. So it's better to say something, to acknowledge it, to ask, to show curiosity in a respectful way than to not. I could go on and on. I have
and you know,
questions,
just
but I
the
want to
last
encourage
thing.
everyone in the audience.
That was really powerful. And I'm so glad we all had an opportunity to see that. For me, I'm lucky enough, like I said earlier, to rewatch that. And I think the biggest takeaway is just, in addition to what feels like hundreds of specifics there, marginalization has many faces, but so does empowerment. And that is what a message. And speaking of messages, we're moving right along. I'm so excited for this next session. I'd like to introduce our very own Ariel Russo, Director of Content and Community at Brand Innovators, and she'll be speaking with Deborah Bass, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer and President at Nuvo Group. So excited to talk to you, ladies, and hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Lauren Rotolo from that last session is just so incredible, isn't she? So welcome, Deborah. So great to have you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. We have another exciting session for you all. But before we begin, I'll start with who I am and why I'm here. So I'm Ariel Russo. I lead community efforts for Brand Innovators. And a huge part of this rewarding role means I have the opportunity to work with the most innovative and inspiring leaders of today. Which brings me to our purpose for this session. Today, we will welcome global business executive, change agent, thought leader, and marketing expert, Deborah Bass, to the stage. Deborah has an incredible journey marking her impact across all fronts, from CPG, big pharma, early stage tech, and much, much more. So let's begin. Hello, Deborah, and welcome once again.
Hi, Ariel, and I have to just acknowledge Lauren Rotolo, having come from J&J. Wow, what an inspiration. So just need to give her a shout out. I was really inspired by her talk and still feel a connection to her from my time at J&J.
I love that. Well, with your background, you have an extensive, impressive background. Can you dive into your overall career journey and give us just a high-level overview of the leadership roles you served at larger brands like Johnson & Johnson, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Panasonic, Procter & Gamble? I can go on and on.
Yeah.
To your evolution towards an early-stage tech startup at Nuvo Group, where you now serve as the brand's Global Chief Marketing Officer and President.
Sure. So I'm going to talk through my career journey and help folks understand some of the choices I made, with an overall theme of, if it's to be, it's up to me, that you really have to own and navigate your career and forge your way, not the way. So I would actually start my career, believe it or not, junior year in college. I was a public policy major at Duke, and I decided to study abroad in London, which is very commonplace now, but when I did this in the late 80s, like not as common. And while in London, I fell in love with marketing and advertising and communications and knew I wanted to pursue something in that space. And as a public policy major, I was required to do an internship in Capitol Hill that summer. And I said, you know what? I don't want to go to Capitol Hill. I'm going to find a way to do a policy issue or lean into a policy issue, but work in marketing. And I was able to find an internship at AT&T, which launched my career in marketing, but allowed me to sort of write my policy thesis. After AT&T, I went back to business school and really wanted to get foundational experience in general management and brand management. And that started my career at Procter & Gamble, which was really amazing training, right? As many know, they mainly hire and promote from within and give great experience in the fundamentals. And I had two very different experiences there. One in laundry, which is like the big sort of muscle of P&G, right? Where you learn the fundamentals. And then I had a very different experience in color cosmetics, which was a new business at P&G, and we talked about going from soap to hope, right? When you're selling cosmetics, it's really aspiration. After P&G, I took my first sort of bold risk move in career, which is I went from CPG to pharmaceuticals. I had a really interesting opportunity to go to Bristol-Myers Squibb and be part of this new hired team of classically trained marketers that were coming into a direct-to-consumer group to help pharma companies really leverage direct-to-patient marketing, which is a big part of the demand generation engine in pharma, but also to be pipeline talent for the big pharma brands. So spent a couple of years at Bristol Myers Squibb, and then went to Johnson & Johnson for 15 years in different commercial capacities. I started out in US consumer, in femcare, and then I ran US baby. And then I spent 6 years in medical devices and orthopedics. That was another sort of risk going over to a brand new category. And then I spent my last 5 years at J&J in global consumer, leading the global baby franchise at a big time of change, and then leading global marketing services as my last role there, which is the marketing capabilities group at J&J, actually how I came to know brand innovators through that role. And then for me personally, after 25 plus years of big co, I got the bug to join a new co and really wanted to get that entrepreneurial experience. So I joined Nuvo almost 4 years ago as their US president and chief marketing officer. Nuvo has very novel technology for remote pregnancy monitoring and management. And it's an Israeli founded health tech company where I was employee one in the US.
Wow, that's an incredible background. Let's dive even deeper and share with our audience some of the even more important lessons that you've championed in the past 25 years, beginning with your favorite part about being a leader. So on our call together, you shared exactly what about leadership excites you the most. The ability to be a true change agent is what you said. And you even just talked about this a little bit earlier, forging your own way. Can you share more about what this type of role means to you and how you served as a change agent throughout your career?
Sure. So a change agent to me is part of the vanguard of a new culture, a new business mission, a new movement to really get different results through change, right? We know insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And I would say my first bold change agent role was at DePuy when I left sort of the comfort and what was known of more of my CPG experience. And then I went over to orthopedics. And DePuy, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's now DePuy Synthes. They have the joint replacement business, so hip and knee implants and spinal implants. And we bought the trauma business from Synthes. And when I first came over to DePuy, I was really hired for that something different of classical marketing to really be leveraged in two ways. One is to build a brand franchise for all of the different operating companies that tucked under DePuy. We wanted the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts. The second was to really shore up the direct-to-patient capabilities to drive demand for the consumer for elective surgeries. And when I first went over there, I got shunned by many because it's a category with lots of institutional knowledge, people that have spent their whole careers in orthopedics, right? So they were very sort of narrow and deep in terms of their expertise, and they had relationships with the surgeons and they had relationships with all the infrastructure, and they were known quantities in the space. So I had a lot of people kind of dismiss me when I first went over there. It's like, what could this person possibly bring to orthopedics? She knows nothing about it. And I really had to earn my keep by putting some points in the board that created impact for the business and some, swagger for the organization in terms of new identity. I'll pause there, or Ariel, and just see where you want to take it.
No, I love that. I mean, going to orthopedics, moving from CPG to pharma, big co to new co, your career also really strongly represents that power of risk. So overall, I think the next question I would love to ask you is, what is the biggest risk you've taken in your overall career journey? And what can those tuning in learn about that importance of taking risks to achieve that next level of success?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about two risks. One that I actually didn't mention in my little career journey, because I'll call it my sort of distraction for a year, but it was a risk that didn't work out. So the first one was I neglected to mention that in between J&J Consumer and DePuy, I went to Panasonic for 1 year as VP of North American marketing for their consumer electronics company. And for those that are not close to Panasonic, it's a Japanese company very traditional Japanese culture. And when I went there in 2007, I was one of the highest ranking women there as a VP. And women didn't have much place or stature in that company, particularly in the traditional part of it in Japan, a little bit less so in the US. But the headline is I spent a year there because it was not a great cultural fit. And really where the rub for me came in was I had 2 young children, and there was not the infrastructure of support for some of the work-life balance needs I had in terms of, again, managing my job and also my family. So one of the lessons for folks there is to really sniff out the culture and also what you need from an employer before you go there. Because I think I was seduced by a new category. I was excited to work for a Japanese company. I'd only worked for American companies, but in hindsight, I didn't do enough diligence about the culture and was it really a fit for not only my professional needs, but my life stage needs. And, it fell short there, didn't work out, was fortunate to pave a path back to J&J. The second big risk that I took in my career was going from the comfort of multinationals to an early stage startup. And again, I joined Nuvo as employee 1. We didn't yet have a validated product. We were still going through clinical validation. We were still going through the regulatory pathway for clearance. So big risk in terms of going to a startup, right? There's always risk there, but also a less resourced environment than what I was familiar with. But it's been incredibly rewarding to learn a whole new set of skills at this stage of my career. And I'll just touch on a few of those skills and pause. So one, learning how to raise capital, right? I've never been on fundraising roadshows as part of my experience in big company, and have had the pleasure of working with our board and my founder in raising capital, right? And it's really, really hard, but it's part of what's important in a startup because it's the lifeblood for new growth. The second sort of big new skill set learning is around market creation, right? Nothing existed. We had a product. So I had to drive development of the corporate narrative, of the corporate brand, of the product brand. And you're starting from a white sheet of paper, right? It's not like I'm going to go work on Johnson's Baby and it stood for this for X amount of years. And here's my sort of incremental update, right? To keep it relevant. So market creation, new brand creation. And then the third big skill has been around very early stage business development in terms of conceptual selling to customers that are buying something that doesn't exist, like the Steve Jobs-like thing, right? People don't really know what they want. You have to tell them and bring it to them and sort of make it work for their reality. So huge risk, incredibly rewarding in terms of new learning, new growth runway, at this stage of my career.
So you've clearly done so many incredible things. And I know we've spoken about risk at this point and all of the impact you've made on these different companies. I'd love for you to share how the power of networking and a relationship has been integrated into this story. So how important is the relationship building, and how can professionals expand their network to grow and develop as leaders, just as you have?
Sure. So for those of you who know me, and I'm guessing perhaps some in the audience do, networking is part of my lifeblood and comes very natural to me, right? I'm a connector at my core. And I network both internally, not only through the expanded circles around my job and where I sit, but also employee resource groups. So while at J&J, I was on the executive steering team of the Women's Leadership Initiative, which was a fantastic group to help advance women in the company, but also build my network, not only internally, but also externally, because it had a link to the Healthcare Women's Business Association, which is a really powerful external network in healthcare. I continue to network in the industry, right? Being part of Brand Innovators is an extension of an external network and community, which I want to give to, but also get back from in terms of new learnings, new connections, et cetera. So I would say that networking is really important. And my advice to everyone listening in is to think about networking, not only internally, whatever company you sit in, but also externally in terms of affinity groups, alliances, organizations, just to expand the potential of your network.
Totally. And with the importance of networking, I also would love to ask, was there any defining person throughout your career that made an impact on your own journey? Tell us more about what mentorship means to you and perhaps how mentorship has shaped your own story.
Sure. So I'll give a few examples there. And I think less about an individual and more about the archetypes of mentors and sponsors I've had. So early in my career, when I was less secure with who I am and what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, I had one of my first bosses at Procter & Gamble really point out to me some of my towering strengths that I had no idea were strengths because I had no perspective. I was just starting. So her pointing out my strengths gave me new confidence to lean into those strengths and to leverage those strengths and to build from those strengths, right? So sometimes mentors can see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And that's really important and powerful. The other part of mentoring is to give you advice objectively when you really need it. So at one point in my career, I was given advice from a coach that I should be more conformist to where I was, right? So I never dressed really conservatively. I was always someone that liked color and accessories, right? It's just who I am. About self-expression. I had a coach tell me, you should tone it down to fit in. And I went to one of my mentors and I asked her, I said, do I need to do this? And she said, don't lose your flair. That's what makes you special, right? So again, an objective perspective you can get from mentors. And the other part of mentors, I'll elevate mentors to advocates or sponsors. I've been very fortunate in my career to have some advocates and sponsors that have placed bets on me to take on new roles. And that's how I was able to cross sectors at J&J, which isn't always easy, right? To get across to a new sector and even to take on new roles of increasing responsibility, just having those sponsors that really believe in you, that are willing to place a bet on you and give you backbone when you assume a new role.
Totally. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to shift gears for a little bit because I think our audiences are also wondering this. After working for some of the biggest brands, what attracted you to early stage tech at Nuvo and being a part of a startup culture?
So there were a few converging forces that pushed me there. In my last job at J&J in global marketing services, we were looking at a lot of the trends in the marketplace. And we saw this whole new breed of direct-to-consumer brands being incubated all over the place that were hyper relevant to consumers, more relevant than we were, just in terms of the core value prop, in terms of the personalized communications, in terms of the channels to reach consumers. So one, I was intrigued by creating new brands to be relevant through some of the exposure in that role. The second thing is just really wanting to make a difference in people's lives. And that's part of what I loved about J&J and Bristol Myers, some of the healthcare companies, right? The bigger purpose beyond the product and what you're playing for. And then recognizing an opportunity to create and build something, leveraging the totality of my experiences, my skills, the network I've built, all of that really emboldened me to go into creation mode and be part of an early stage startup. And again, it's been really fun to be able to create something from nothing, right? Well, and to be fair, this company had a product, it wasn't nothing, but there was no real story or brand behind it, right? To help bring it to life and give it some punch on the market.
Totally. So to that end, what are some of your biggest learnings that you've taken from Johnson & Johnson and BMS to bring to your success at Nuvo?
Sure. So first, it's all about authenticity, right? So when you're building a brand and bringing your brand to life and creating experiences, you need to be authentic in terms of where your brand comes from and who are the consumers you serve and how do you delight them, et cetera. And I learned that through all my big co-experience. And what was exciting about Nuvo is the product is authentic because it's born out of a founder's story, right? So quick backstory is Nuvo has novel technology for remote pregnancy monitoring and management. And the founder, Ornaz, out of Israel, he and his wife navigated the burden of a high-risk pregnancy and had to go back and forth to the clinic multiple times a week. And he talked about his wife working and being pregnant and had this big epiphany. You know, data should travel, women should not. Why do women have to travel to get plugged into a wall? Like this is, at the time, it was 2014. So his big epiphany and personal experience and pain point created a new product and category and helped inform the brand. So one, it comes from a place of authenticity, a real life pain point. The second is articulating a bigger purpose, right? Of playing for something bigger beyond the product. And our purpose is to give life a better beginning, because for us, it's not only about that early monitoring, but also all the data signals we collect that could help with better management of the pregnancy at a formative stage of life for better outcomes. So really, we exist to give life a better beginning. So part of the big co-experience of articulating your purpose, and that's really a reason for the organization to come in every day, the tie that binds, what keeps you centered and grounded during the tough times, right? In startups, there are many tough times. The other sort of lesson from Big Co that I brought to New Co is really leaning on and leveraging your best agency relationships, right? So throughout a career, I've built relationships with a lot of my agency partners at Interbrand and many of the different holding company agencies for creative agencies, digital agencies, media agencies. And while I couldn't afford to use any of them the same way I did while at big companies, I was able to negotiate smaller scopes with some of those most trusted agency partners to help get the Nuvo brand off the ground and really build something relevant to our consumers.
So I know we spoke a lot about the value of purpose to your consumers on our call, and as a smaller brand, I know you shared some of the learnings, but what are some more of the challenges that your team had to overcome in effectively reaching its consumers as a smaller brand?
So for us, the biggest challenge right now, because we're early and we're just getting adoption in the market, is it's a prescribed product. And while we believe the consumer is the ultimate customer and who we built this for to better serve, pregnant patients, expectant moms, it's a prescribed product. So job one is getting OBGYNs and maternal fetal medicine specialists on board. So we've really focused thus far on the B2B to start. And then the plan is to then unleash B2B2C to tack on the to C component once we have an installed base of prescribers. So it's been this challenge of wanting to go to the consumer earlier, but we can't go there before we have enough of a nationally representative group of prescribers, right? As I learned early in packaged goods, you can't advertise empty shelves. So I don't want to drive demand if there's nowhere for mom to get our product in her local community.
Totally. Well, it definitely sounds like a challenge. But speaking of challenges, you also mentioned being a part of Nuvo just as the pandemic began. Can you share with our audiences how this Israeli-based company adapted to this pandemic era and what the challenges a global team has faced and overcome over the past few years?
Sure. So one, I'll say that fortunately for me, it started with equity in the bank of being able to build the relationships in real life before the pandemic started. And I think when you're working with people from a different country and a different culture who speak a different first language, right? I learned all these lessons at Panasonic as well. Some of that in-person teaming is really important just to get to know each other beyond the job and build some foundational comfort and trust. So I was fortunate that I had some of that before the pandemic started. once the pandemic kicked in and all bets were off in terms of travel, we, like many companies, did our best to stay connected with different forums of Zoom and tried to mix it up with not only Zoom meetings, but also Zoom happy hours and more social moments, et cetera. I will tell you what became really hard for me amidst the pandemic and me and the US team is just being the whole voice and weight of this market for all of our colleagues in Israel, right? So when they were able to travel, they were able to come over here and listen to customers and consumers and hear it directly from customers, right? It put a lot of burden on me and other colleagues to just be the whole voice and weight of this market. And we're still working through that. You know, we sort of carry the day there, but it was really hard. There's nothing like hearing a customer speak directly, right? It all resonates and becomes real when you're in a real person's life with a real pregnancy, with a real issue, you know, versus through a translation trying to explain pain points, et cetera.
Totally. So I think this conversation is definitely moving into how we can shape the organization of the future. So in your opinion, with experience in both large and small companies, what does the organization of the future look like?
So, and I'll frame it through a marketing organization, right? Just I think to be more relevant to this community, but perhaps infuse some broader thinking there. So I really believe in the power of and, right? And you've probably heard that in other forums as well from different leaders. So the classical marketing discipline around positioning and customer understanding and a lot of that sort of 4P knowledge, I still believe is very relevant foundationally. However, the organization of the future not only needs to have that sensibility and toolkit, but also the more modern playbook in terms of insights and analytics, with an emphasis on analytics and data-driven insights and first-party data and ability to more deeply understand your consumer and be more personalized in how to reach her. The organization of the future is bricks and mortar and e-commerce, really omnichannel experiences. And we see that in retail and CPG, and we see that in healthcare, right? If you think about healthcare, and I'll just stick with pregnancy care in my current space, why in 2021 does a woman have to go to a clinic or a doctor's office for all of her care where she could do everything else through her phone, right? So how do we start to shift some of the care delivery to the home and have a hybrid care experience? So bricks and mortar and e-commerce or virtual visits in care. The organization of the future also should reflect the faces of the consumers whom we serve. So I am a big believer in diversity and inclusion and really looking around the table and keeping each other honest in terms of representing different voices and faces and lifestyles and life stages. The other part of the organization of the future is both the big co-leadership with the entrepreneurial spirit. So it also mix up leadership teams to include people intentionally who came from startup world and how to stretch and build different muscles to build businesses and brands. And I think that's what's going to be so powerful, how to sort of mix it up with different old and new skill sets, with diversity and inclusion, and with big co and small co types of experiences.
100%. And with all of these changes that need to be made, tell us how important training is when it comes to this growth.
Training is critical, right? And I think even to attract and retain employees, to help employees understand that we're investing in your development, and this is a place where you're going to learn and grow, is really important. What I would say about training is it needs to take different forms. So there's always the formalized training that's part of a job, right? So at J&J, we had the marketing excellence curriculum, which gave folks opportunity for live classroom, now virtual visit type training, but also online training that's self-paced, right? Where you can beef up your skills. I'm also, though, a big believer in on-the-job training. And I think that's the most valuable training. And managers really need to help give employees feedback and get the courage to give real candid feedback. So I think on the job training is really important. The last thing I'd say is you have to own it. You can't expect your manager to own your growth and development. Back to, if it's to be, it's up to me. You need to know what you're playing for, what skills you want to develop, what skills you need to develop to achieve your aspirations, and ask for that feedback if you're not getting it, so you could develop and own your personal work plan.
I love that. If it's to be, it's up to me. 100%. So talking about all of these learnings and all of the brands you've touched upon in your career, is there a certain success story or campaign you can share with us that best represents how powerful a great organization and great teamwork and forward thinking can be?
Sure. So I will actually go back to my DePuy Synthes example, because it started out as one of the toughest assignments. And I alluded earlier how I earned the confidence and support of that organization by putting points on the board. So when I joined, it was actually amidst the Beijing Olympics, ironically, which are coming up again, right? A very different version of them, but the Beijing Olympics. And we had hired Coach K to be our spokesperson for DePuy because he had 2 DePuy hips. And really the brief for me was J&J has this huge partnership with the Olympics that we're going to be promoting as a corporate sponsorship. We have Coach K as our spokesperson. We want to do something with DePuy and we have no idea what to do with all those assets. Go figure it out, Deborah. Oh, and by the way, you have 90 days. So my mantra was 90 days to Beijing. And I really pulled together my team in terms of agency partners, in terms of leaders on the businesses that were running the hip and knee businesses at the time, and corporate equity at J&J, right? Other key stakeholders. And we created this big idea of DePuy Never Stop Moving, leaning into the persona of Coach K as someone, and I don't know if the audience knows Coach K. I mean, I'm a Duke grad, so he's extra special to me, but he's actually retiring this year after many, many years of coaching Duke and the Dream Team in the Olympics. But he is really the persona of Never Stop Moving. And his story was how his joint replacements allowed him to continue to achieve and go on and realize his aspirations, not only as someone that's physically fit as a person, but through his rigorous coaching job, right, which was physically demanding. And that campaign was incredibly rewarding in galvanizing the organization, bringing us together. And for me, earning the confidence of the leaders at DePuy that this alien, from packaged goods could actually add something valuable to the business. It created swagger. I'll never forget this. I was at a national sales meeting. We had a distributor sales force. And when I played the spot for the campaign, I got a standing ovation from the sales force, right? Which was, I still remember that moment. And I also remember the internal folks noticing that moment. Well, if this person could create some support and swagger with the sales organization, there's talent here to lean into. And hopefully I set an example for more talent to come from consumer and a different skill set, right? To bring just different texture to that business.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I want to shift gears a little bit and do some forward thinking part of our chat. So with such a long and uncertain year behind us, actually a few years behind us, what is one valuable takeaway or learning that you're definitely taking with you into 2022?
So one is just the importance of self-care. I think early in the pandemic, it was so easy to get sucked into all Zoom all the time, right? Because there was no transit time and there were no scheduled lunches and all these things that naturally broke up my day didn't exist anymore. And I'm working for an Israeli company where we start super early, right? So just had a few personal setbacks that were reminders of the importance of self-care and really building that into your schedule in terms of healthy eating and exercise and mental wellness and owning that and holding myself accountable. So that's a big lesson.
I feel like in this new era, you can't even go to the bathroom because you don't have that 2 minutes in between a meeting in person where, oh, I'm just going to run to the bathroom. You know, you're on Zoom and it's like, well, why are you 2 minutes late? There's no excuse. You don't have to get from one end of the building to the next. So I even think that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And again, part of something to own, right? How do you own your schedule and build in those spaces just so you have some wellness breaks?
So on a larger scale, more consumer facing, what behaviors and trends and consumer expectations do you expect we might see this year ahead? Are there any particular trends you're focusing on in this next year?
Sure. So I'll just stick with my space, but it's broader to retail. It's just the shift to digital health and on-demand care, right? So I would say it was an unmet need before the pandemic, and it became an acute need during the pandemic, where people still needed healthcare. But when we were all on lockdown and buildings were closed, or you were afraid of getting exposed to COVID, we all learned how to use telehealth. And it has shined a light on the importance of tools to make telehealth visits more robust and more effective. So I think we'll see more use of telehealth, an expanded array of caregivers. Again, I'm sticking with my space. What's really interesting in healthcare, and I'll use obstetrics as an example, but it could be anything. It's not only about your core caregiver of the OB, if I'm a pregnant person, but also extended care of my mental health expert and my nutritionist and social services and broader array of caregiving to support consumers or patients in their journey. And now we have the power of touch and tech to extend that, right, and make it more viable. So I'm bullish on this shift, and I think we need more tools to deepen adoption and make it more meaningful. The other thing we're just seeing is consumer demands are through the roof, right? We want everything on demand through our phone, and we want it when we want it, how we want it, personalized just for me. And that insight, I think, also has become elevated during the pandemic, where we were forced to live off our phones more, right? And have more demands met through e-commerce.
So I love the benefit of telehealth that has come out of this pandemic. Oh no, Leanne, are you coming to shut us down?
Not to shut you down, just a gentle reminder that we are reaching the end of time, but you carry on.
I have one last question that I just would love to ask. And I know you have touched upon this with the tools and the telehealth that you were just speaking about. But I would love to expand on it. What are the ways brands can step in to create a better world? I mean, especially as Nuvo is already doing this, how can other brands step in and do the same?
So brands really need to understand their consumers and the state of culture and the state of the world, and authentically create value from benefits that you can deliver given who you are and what you have to offer. And I think every brand should take a step back, just knowing we're in a very fragile world right now with climate change and political pressures and living 2 years into a pandemic. And what can you as a brand and a company offer given who you are to better serve your consumers? And I think we're seeing brands do that. I'll use a brand outside my category that, Lysol and Clorox, 2 brands, right? The thick of the pandemic, what could those brands do? We were all petrified of germs and surfaces and just those brands, right? Being there and creating new standards for cleaning in hotel rooms and on planes and in our homes and doing everything they could to make their products available. Those are great examples of brands better serving consumers by being who they are and what benefits they can offer versus borrowed interest of trying to play, to someone else's territory.
I love that to end our last question. And before we close out, Deborah, I just would like to also ask you, do you have any closing words or any last piece of advice for anyone tuning in?
If it's to be, it's up to me. Take risks in your career. there's no the way, there's my way. So know what you want, go for it, and enlist the help of mentors and sponsors to get there.
Perfect.
I love that too. By the way, thanks for letting me jump in here at the end, but I got so much out of that too. And that unfortunately is bringing us to the end of today. And I just want to reiterate though, Deborah, you, again, like all of our speakers said so many incredible things, but what really shined through in each session that you brought to, I think, the forefront and kind of wrapped everything up with is authenticity. And, you know, authenticity both in a consumer facing, customer facing way, but authenticity with ourselves. Like your mentor along the line or along the way said something too, like, don't lose your flair. I love that. You have to be authentic to yourself, you know, and that's something that I think we as women need to continue to practice. And then we will literally run the world when we are all authentic with ourselves. So I love that. And I can't wait to talk to you about Coach K, Christian Leitner, Bobby Hurley, all those guys, but we'll save that basketball conversation for offline because we've reached the end of our day and I can't believe it. It doesn't feel like it just has flown by. I hope everybody out there has been inspired like I have and has learned a lot. It's just been the best day. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in. Huge shout out to all of our speakers, our sponsors, and for all of you in our audience for making this just an incredible day. Make sure to check out the Brand Innovators website because Brand Innovators, as you are all learning, if you didn't know before today, does incredible events on a weekly basis. So brand-innovators.com is the website. You can find out lots more information there. Brand Innovators is also on Instagram, just Brand Innovators. On LinkedIn, Brand Innovators, very easy to find. And if you need or want to find me to get in touch, ask questions, just connect, I'd love it. My Instagram is at Leanne Shear Will, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you all again. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe and healthy and happy. And we will see you all again very soon. Take care.